Story 1.
Discovering my wife's cheating, seeking revenge at my daughter's wedding, and learning to let go. It's been a dozen long years since my world was emotionally turned upside down. Reflecting on it now, I see how much my tone and attitude have changed over that time. I recall the days when my partner and I enjoyed a nearly flawless marriage. We met in college, fell deeply in love, and soon after graduating, we tied the knot. I was a jock, playing football and baseball, while she was stunningly beautiful and incredibly intelligent. Together, we did everything socializing, pursuing hobbies, and weathering storms as a united front. Life, however, is never without its challenges. We supported each other through family tragedies and health scares, including her battle with cancer and my heart condition. We truly were partners in every sense of the word, and our love for each other continued to flourish. As our careers advanced, we upgraded our homes within the same school district and indulged in a lake house, creating countless cherished memories with our children. Despite our busy lives, we never neglected planning for the future, saving for our children's education, and achieving debt-free status in the final years of our marriage. As a family, we were always on the move: vacations, camping trips, date nights, bowling with friends. Staying busy and engaged amidst the chaos of daily life, we never lost sight of our love. We made a conscious effort to nurture our relationship, and that commitment yielded countless rewards. Certainly, no relationship is flawless, and we had our share of disagreements. Yet, we consistently approached those moments with love and respect, steering clear of anger or shouting. We functioned as a team in the truest sense, and our partnership brought us endless joy and fulfillment. Reflecting on it now, I realize our happiness was built on a foundation of hard work, dedication, and commitment. I'm certain my wife would have agreed her love was robust and only strengthened with each passing day. Our children, a son and a daughter separated by 2 years, illuminate our lives with their radiance. Their presence has brought immeasurable happiness and affection. As they matured and formed their own families, our contentment expanded even further. Our son showcased an innate athleticism akin to his father's, which his coaches and I guided onto the right path, ultimately earning him a baseball scholarship. Our daughter, on the other hand, excelled as a choir member and cheerleader. Despite her youth, she displayed remarkable maturity and composure, filling us with pride at every turn. As a father, my daughter's special bond with me was a treasure. She was always known as Daddy's girl. However, when she entered her teenage years, our relationship began to falter. She distanced herself from me, and I couldn't seem to connect with her, no matter how hard I tried. It was a painful period, but I knew she still loved me deep down. Fortunately, this arduous phase didn't last forever. Our relationship gradually mended, and we once again became close. I will never forget the immense pride I felt as she approached the culmination of her high school journey. Our union was a fairy tale come to life. I exhausted every strategy in my arsenal, from lavishing her with endearments and attention to attempting novel undertakings as a team. I went to extreme lengths to enhance my physical appearance, hopeful that it would reignite her ardor for me. However, it felt like grasping at smoke. The more I tried, the more elusive the solution appeared. My spouse became increasingly distant, and a sense of foreboding enveloped me. When she expressed her desire for a divorce, my world crumbled. How could this be happening? What had gone wrong? The shock and perplexity were insurmountable, not only for me but for our children as well. I could sense the pain and confusion in my own words, as if it was seeping through the screen. Losing someone so important, so integral to my life, was a pain that I wouldn't wish on anyone. The fear of the unknown, the uncertainty of what was happening to my marriage, was evident in every sentence I uttered. One night, I sat down with my wife and asked her if everything was okay. At first, she brushed off my concerns, telling me that she was just tired from work and that it was nothing to worry about. However, I knew my wife better than that and persisted until she finally broke down and told me the truth. She had been feeling disconnected from me for some time, and she wasn't sure if she was happy in our marriage anymore. I was stunned. I had no idea that my wife had been feeling this way. I asked her what I could do to make things better, but she didn't know. She just knew that something had to change. Over the next few weeks, I worked hard to reignite the spark in our relationship. I planned romantic dates, surprised her with small gestures of kindness, and made an effort to listen to her when she spoke. Slowly but surely, my wife began to respond to my efforts. We started laughing together again, sharing our hopes and dreams and working through our problems as a team. I had tried everything I could think of to save it, but nothing seemed to be working. The desperation in my voice was palpable, my heart breaking with every passing moment. I knew I had to do something, but I was powerless to stop the inevitable. The inability to ask my wife if she still loved me highlighted the vast emotional distance between us. The notion of someone else causing our separation only struck me during a coffee meeting with her best friend, and even then, I clung to denial. Symptoms like loss of appetite, trouble sleeping, and constant crying portrayed a man witnessing his world crumble, helpless to halt it. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of despair, unable to see a way out. The image of me lying on the floor, gazing at the ceiling for hours with my dog's head on my chest was both heartbreaking and heartwarming. It served as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, someone or something could offer comfort and solace. My beloved pet sensed my pain and provided a sense of peace and support. It was evident I loved my wife deeply and would have done anything to save our marriage. Feeling helpless and out of control testified to how much I cared. It unfolded as a tragic tale of lost love, a fractured marriage, and a man left to pick up the pieces of his shattered heart. Recalling my story, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empathy and compassion for myself, for the pain and loss endured. Losing my beloved wife felt like an unceasing wave of torment crashing over me. Each day became a battle to rise without her at my side, rendering the love, time, and effort we devoted to each other seemingly futile. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't reconnect with her or mend our bond. Divorce, an inevitable and bitter reality I was unwilling to confront. The prospect of losing her entirely, even as a friend, was devastating. Feeling inadequate as a spouse, unable to meet her needs, and incapable of preserving our marriage, the pain persisted. Yet, in spite of the pain, we remained amicable and respectful throughout, resolved to avoid inflicting more hurt. Dividing our possessions was a bittersweet experience. Together, we had toiled diligently to create a life we could both take pride in, and now it was being partitioned and sold. The memories formed in those two residences would forever be a part of me, but the idea of returning without her was intolerable. The finality of signing the divorce papers was gut-wrenching. I could see the tears in her eyes, and I knew she was hurting just as much as I was. It felt like a final goodbye, as if a piece of my heart was being ripped out. The pain of losing a long-term partner is enduring, leaving a scar that time may soften but will always remain. Amid the hurt and heartbreak, I hold on to the good times we shared and the love we once had for each other, finding some comfort. The bittersweet reality of watching your daughter grow up and get married is a feeling no parent can escape. As I sat there, surrounded by the people I love, a sense of melancholy crept up on me. My daughter, my little girl, was getting married and starting a new chapter in her life. It was a joyous occasion, of course, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness deep within my heart. Then an almost magical occurrence unfolded. My daughter took a seat beside me, her head resting on my shoulder, and we engaged in conversation, laughter, and reminiscence about old times. It was a beautiful moment, one I knew I'd treasure forever. As we sipped our scotch, gazing into the flickering flames of the fireplace, a profound sense of gratitude washed over me. I felt thankful for my daughter and her fiancé, for my family and friends, and for the love surrounding me. Despite the ongoing healing from my divorce, I recognized the need to keep moving forward and find happiness wherever I could. But in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the love of my family, I felt content. I knew that everything was going to be all right, and that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would always have the support and love of those closest to me. Approaching the end of our conversation, my daughter and I began to delve into more serious topics. And that's when she brought up the divorce. It was something we hadn't really discussed in depth, other than addressing logistics. However, this time we delved into the emotional aspects of it. I asked my daughter, now a grown woman, what it was genuinely like to live with me, and acknowledged that I knew I wasn't a perfect parent. It was a risky question, but one I felt compelled to ask after the divorce. To my surprise, my daughter opened up and shared that at times I could be intense and had high expectations. She admitted they all worried about disappointing me, but she also added that she knew I loved and protected them and would always be there. In fact, she even giggled as she shared that they used to affectionately refer to me as Sergeant Dad, or the Sergeant. I acknowledged that I wasn't always the most emotionally open person, but reassured her that I cared deeply for them, even if not always overtly expressed. It was then that she shared something that left me stunned. She hoped her new husband would be as good a husband and father as I am, and wished that I could find someone who made me happy and didn't cheat like Mom. That's when it hit. Mammy daughter thought I knew about my wife's infidelity all along. She disclosed knowing about my ex-wife's cheating before our divorce and assumed that I had been aware all along. I was in disbelief and asked her why she hadn't told me before. She explained, presuming I knew more than she did, and that's why I had divorced Mom. She also shared that it was a really difficult time for her, and she had purposely avoided the topic with me, other than making sure I was okay. I hugged her tightly and thanked her for standing by me throughout everything. She would always be my little girl. I asked her when it had happened and how long it had been going on for. She didn't know for sure but guessed that it started a month or so before Mom first mentioned divorce. I also asked if her brother knew, and she confirmed that he did. In fact, he was the one who did some social media research and suspected there might be someone else. I was amazed at how perceptive my kids were. It all started to make sense why my children were so cold to their mother and so sympathetic to me during all of this. I hugged my daughter tight, grateful for her honesty and her love. She was the only thing that made sense in my life right now. As I held her close, I knew that I needed to be strong for her and for my son. They were the only reasons I had left to keep going. My ex-wife's betrayal wrought profound changes. It altered how I perceived her, myself, and the world. It felt as if a part of me had perished, leaving me clueless about recovery. All I knew was the necessity to persist, to keep moving forward, even if only one step at a time. The night her affair was exposed marked a pivotal moment. Until then, I strived for civility during our divorce proceedings, but now, uncertainty clouded my actions. Racing thoughts deprived me of sleep that night. Reflecting, I noticed her enhanced self-care, more frequent hair and nail treatments, purchasing nicer clothes, and dedicating more time to her makeup. Initially, I assumed it was an effort to keep pace with younger colleagues at work, only now realizing it likely signaled preparation for her affair. The truth surfaced. My ex-wife had already found someone else, another man. The rejection was already challenging, but this betrayal cut much deeper, shattering my world once again. My daughter showed me the other man's Facebook page and other sites. I discovered he was an executive at one of my ex's larger accounts. Though his posts didn't mention my ex by name, they strongly suggested an infatuation with someone sounding exactly like her. Despite my daughter's comment about him not being as good-looking as me, seeing my ex-wife with someone else was painful. I immediately severed all communication with my ex-wife, ignoring texts and calls, even avoiding contact with her friends. The fact that her best friend never followed up made me wonder if she had been aware of the affair all along. But one night, overwhelmed with anger and hurt, I broke into my ex-wife's house, determined to destroy everything in sight. I smashed her belongings, poured bleach on her clothes, and defaced her family photos. I wanted her to feel the pain and betrayal I had experienced upon discovering her infidelity. Amid my destructive rampage, my ex-wife suddenly appeared. Expecting outrage and authorities to be called, I was surprised when she looked at me with a mix of sadness and pity. Her response shocked me. Instead of anger and bitterness, she showed compassion and understanding. She asked for my forgiveness, confessing that she had cheated on me and was too ashamed to tell me during the divorce. At that moment, my anger dissipated. I realized my ex-wife had been suffering as well, and my actions had only caused more pain. A week later, my daughter got married, and both my ex and I attended. Still feeling angry and hurt, I tried to focus on my daughter's special day. Despite losing over pounds due to stress and increased workouts, I felt good in my tailored tux as I walked her down the aisle. During the ceremony, my ex looked stunning, wearing everything she knew I liked. Despite this, I didn't say a word to her, still angry about her deception. I pulled away. When she tried to hold my hand during the vows, I also ensured that our thighs and shoulders didn't touch during the picture session. I didn't engage with my ex, focusing on joking with my daughter and everyone else. When we got to the reception, I was relieved to find prearranged seating, so I sat next to my daughter. My ex was seated a few chairs down, which must have been difficult for her. At that point, I don't think she realized I knew about her affair. I made no mention of my ex and my heartfelt father of the bride toast, treating it as if she played no role in raising our daughter. During the father-daughter dance, despite her tears, I intentionally avoided looking in her direction. Although we were supposed to dance with both sets of parents, I chose to skip it entirely. The rest of the evening was spent joyfully with my daughter, son, and new son-in-law, successfully sidestepping my ex. I didn't witness her departure, so I'm uncertain how long she stayed, but she appeared melancholy every time I saw her. Though a challenging experience, it taught me much about myself and my ability to navigate tough situations. While it might not have been my proudest moment, I believe I did what was necessary to safeguard my emotional well-being. It was a bitter pill to swallow when, after over 28 years together, she opted for someone else during a difficult period in my life. However, I've made significant strides since then. As my counselor foresaw, I had to adapt to living alone and rediscover my purpose. Despite the initial difficulty, I can genuinely say the pain has dissipated. Instead, I dedicated myself to crafting a space that truly reflects me, I transformed my house into a dream haven, adding a third bay in the garage for my Harley Softail with a deuce seat and an ATV. Riding has always been a passion, but my ex prohibited me from having a motorcycle. Now, I enjoy the freedom to ride whenever I please. I upgraded my kitchen and living areas with the latest amenities, yet my favorite part remains the man cave in the basement, with a top-of-the-line sound system, video facilities, wet bar, and quality gym. It provides everything I need to unwind. Sitting in my recliner, listening to classical or old rock music something my ex never allowed me to play loudly as a true pleasure. My house has become the go-to spot for game days, where friends and family gather to watch multiple games simultaneously, akin to a sports bar. I even set up a playroom for my grandkids, furnished with a TV and toys. I cherish the moments spent with my grandkids and their parents when they visit regularly. Just last week, we had a delightful pumpkin carving party. My ex would have enjoyed it. I'm contemplating getting another dog for companionship, especially with the grandkids around. Additionally, I installed a remote wood-burning furnace with a heat exchanger, efficiently heating my home mostly from my own timber. It's not only cost-effective but also keeps me active during colder months. In conclusion, despite the painful past, I'm thankful for the chance to rebuild my life and create a home I adore. I've discovered new passions, enjoyed time with loved ones, and forged memories that will endure. It's been 12 years since my ex-wife left me for another man, and I've accepted that she chose him over our 28 years together. Initially painful, as my counselor predicted, I learned to live alone and redefine my life's purpose. I turned my house into a dream haven, adding a third garage bay for my new Harley Softail and ATV. The kitchen and living areas received modern upgrades, and the basement became my sanctuary, a man cave with top-notch entertainment, a wet bar, and a gym. I also created a special playroom for my grandkids, furnished with a TV and toys. Hosting events like our recent pumpkin carving party has become a joy, and I'm even considering getting another dog for companionship. Regarding my romantic life, I've discovered the enjoyment of being single and re-entering the dating scene. Initially, my friends' partners attempted to set me up with other women, but I resisted. However, almost 2 years later, I yielded to a double date, urged by my kids. It was initially awkward, but now I have ongoing relationships with several remarkable women. Dating in my 50s and early 60s differs from my youth. There are numerous smart, attractive, unattached women my age and younger, seeking attention from a relatively healthy man. You don't need to be a superstar. Being respectful, attentive, confident, and most importantly, fun is crucial. I'm entirely honest about not wanting a wife or an exclusive relationship. I exercise caution and am highly selective, avoiding married women or seeking only one-night stands. I must genuinely like her, have fun, enjoy her company, and sense the same reciprocation. I take them to concerts, ball games, camping, backyard cookouts, dinner theaters, and other activities before getting too close. Adjusting to the idea of non-exclusivity and not succumbing to jealousy or possessiveness took time. I realized I can't control my partner, and that's okay. It's part of the arrangement. I enjoy dating without the pressure of exclusivity, refreshing for both me and my lady friends. If something more, closeness, happens naturally, that's great, but I don't pressure or seduce them into it. I have a couple of longtime lady friends with whom I've never been close, and that's okay too. Overall, I'm living my best life, grateful for the experiences and people within it. Being a private pilot for many years, I relish flying my own small experimental amateur-built plane. Unfortunately, my wife never shared my passion. To address this, I've invited each of my lady friends to fly-ins and short trips. I even take them on breakfast or lunch trips on my Harley, a popular outing known as the Hamburger. Each of these special women has her own passions, and I've tried to share in those as well. I've climbed Mount Baker after months of training, earned my PADI open water dive certificate, and even gone skydiving in tandem with them. Surprisingly, I enjoyed attending the opera with one of them. However, my most memorable experience involved crashing wedding parties at city parks, mingling with guests, enjoying their offerings, contributing to collections, and throwing $100 in the collection jar or money tree. Although I spend a lot of time with these women, more often than not, I'm home alone or cuddling with one while watching Netflix or listening to her favorite music. The point is, these women push me to do things I would never have done on my own. I still struggle with wanting these women exclusively, especially the wedding crasher who is the whole package. But I know I cannot allow myself to think that way. Shortly before COVID, I went on a 7-day cruise with 3 attractive women. I had only dated and been close with one before the trip, but all 3 were fun and flirty. We laughed and had the best time going on day excursions and dancing and partying on the ship every night. It was probably the best vacation of my life, except for some memorable trips with our pre-teen kids. At the end of the cruise, a cruise line representative approached me and asked if I would like to go on future cruises at unbelievable discounts. Apparently, they needed more older single men to dance and interact with all the single ladies and widows. As flattering as it was, I couldn't help but feel like a gigolo. Though I'm living my best life, I acknowledge that my ex-wife may not be as fortunate. I've heard that her relationship with the other man endured for about 3 years. Nevertheless, I didn't delve into the specifics or inquire if they live together. It's no longer my concern. I started responding to her texts and emails around 5 years ago to accommodate my kids, but our communication mostly revolves around sharing information and pictures about the kids and grandkids. My ex-wife expresses a desire to discuss the divorce and the affair, answering any questions I may have. However, I lack the inclination to delve into those details. I see no benefit, so I simply disregard those particular emails. We've encountered each other at weddings and funerals, exchanging polite greetings. The last in-person conversation occurred at our newest grandson's christening. She still looked attractive but older, as we all do. We spent over 2 hours discussing the grandkids and reminiscing about fond memories. Though I occasionally mourn the loss of my marriage, these are undeniably the golden years. The duration of this phase remains uncertain, but my ex-wife and I have recently committed to supporting each other as we age. She is the mother of my children and the grandmother of my grandchildren, and we were married for years. We've even signed HIPAA and medical directive forms for each other. While we are no longer a couple, my daughter has observed that I am more content and easygoing than before, a change I attribute to my retirement last year. The liberation from job pressures and office politics has significantly impacted my daily attitude. These are genuinely the golden years, and I'm grateful for this newfound freedom. Occasionally, I still lament the end of my marriage, especially when confronted with old photos or places that evoke memories of our shared past. Recently, my ex-wife has invited me to dinner at her condo, or on a topic my daughter has brought up several times. Interestingly, my ex isn't involved with anyone and hasn't been for years, raising questions about the purpose behind their sudden interest in my social life. While intrigued, I approach the situation cautiously. I'm uncertain if there's a collective effort against me, but I trust my daughter's intentions, knowing she would never allow me to be hurt again. In any case, I am content with my current life, whether single or in a relationship. I cherished my married life with my wife, and now I appreciate the freedom of my single life. Whatever unfolds, life continues, and I'm assured that I will not be alone in my old age, regardless of whether I reunite with my ex.
Story 2.
After 16 years of marriage, I discovered my wife's affair with my business partner. She left me, our daughter, and now she's back, demanding custody and more. My ex-wife Kathy, 38 female, and I, 38 male, had been together for 19 years, married for 16. We also had a 14-year-old daughter together. But she left it all almost 6 months ago to be with my work partner, ex-work partner to be precise, since he sold his shares and left the business after I discovered the affair. Leon, the guy I used to run the business with, was my coworker earlier, and we became very good friends, which is why we decided to quit our jobs and start the company together. We had been working together for the past 5 years, and he had been having an affair with my wife for 3 of those years. I found out about it almost 6 months back because of some texts that I found on my wife's phone. When I confronted her about it, she did not even bother to deny it and just accepted all of it. She told me that she was sick and tired of hiding things like this when all she wanted to do was just leave. I was devastated because I had no idea that she was unhappy in our marriage, and I was willing to do anything to fix that. So, the day that I confronted her and she said that she was leaving, I even told her that we could still make this work, and that was pretty stupid of me, but I was desperate. She just started getting annoyed with me and said that the only reason she had even married me in the first place was because she got pregnant, and she didn't want to be on her own. She had tried to love me for the past 16 years, but it hadn't worked out, and now she had found someone that she actually loved. She wasn't going to let me hold her back and said that now that I had found out about the affair and her secret was out, I had to suck it up and let it go. I was really heartbroken, more so for the sake of our daughter, but she didn't even think twice before leaving. She filed for a divorce, and the petition was relatively simple. She just wanted to leave, and she didn't even demand any sort of settlement or alimony from me, and the division of assets was pretty fair. So within a couple of months, we were able to finalize the divorce because I came to my senses after a while and realized that after what had happened, I would never be able to make it work with her. After we had filed for the divorce, I confronted Leon as well, and he just apologized and told me that he had wanted to tell me about it a long time back but did not know how to come clean to me. Within a couple of weeks, he had resigned and told me that he and Kathy would be moving away because they didn't want to create any more trouble for me than they already had. Also, Kathy had been offered a pretty amazing job in Boston, and his cousin also lived in Boston, so he could just work with his cousin instead, and it had already been sorted out. He put this all in an email, and after that, we never spoke to each other again. The last time that I saw Kathy was 2 months ago, the day that our divorce was finalized. Since then, I hadn't heard from either of them, and things were tough for me and my daughter, but we were getting through it somehow. At least I still had my business to run, and that was keeping me busy because no matter what, I wanted to be able to give my daughter the kind of future that she wanted. But around 1 week ago, Kathy showed up again, and I'm still kind of confused about whether my daughter and I did the right thing or not. So, 1 week ago, around 11 in the evening, somebody frantically started ringing our doorbell and knocking relentlessly. My daughter was already in bed by then, and I was just finishing up some work in my office when that happened, so both of us rushed to the door to check, and through the window we saw that it was Kathy. My daughter asked me not to open the door because so far, she has been very upset with her mother, since even though she has partial custody, Kathy has made no effort to keep in touch with our daughter. Also, the fact that she cheated on me doesn't sit right with my daughter either, so I would say that they have a pretty bad relationship at the moment. But I knew that if Kathy had shown up at my door at such a time, it must be about something important, and I opened the door to let her in. Instead of coming in, though, she just started yelling at me from the doorstep and said that she was going to file a lawsuit against me and make sure that this went to court, and she got whatever she was owed, because she couldn't believe that I had chosen to punish her so cruelly. For the first couple of seconds, I had no idea what she was talking about, and I had to ask her to slow down and elaborate because I was so confused. She was still pretty pissed, and said that there was no need for me to pretend not to know, because she was pretty sure that I had hidden the real nature of Leon from her because I wanted to punish her for cheating. She then pulled up the sleeve of her shirt and showed me a spot on her arm with a band-aid on it. I was able to figure out that Leon must have done something. And it came as a shock to me as well because we had worked together for several years, but he had never even lost his cool in front of me. Kathy told me that for the past couple of weeks, ever since they had moved to Boston, they had been fighting a lot, and nothing had stayed the same after their move. She had figured out that it was just because Leon was still trying to adjust to this new life, but even after spending 1 full month there, he was acting like this was all Kathy's fault. Apparently, he kept accusing her of ruining his life because he had to leave the business that he had worked so hard on, and here he had to work with his cousin, who constantly kept undermining him. He blamed Kathy for all of this because she was the one who had revealed the affair to me before he was ready, and he had to move all the way here for her job so he couldn't fight for the business either. They had been fighting every night, and the night before she came to our doorstep, he got really mad and threw a vase at her. She tried to dodge it, but it still hit her arm and she got cut. So far, he had only been verbally abusing her, but this time, things had gone too far. And she had left the house that night and taken the next flight here so that she could speak to me about this. She told me that Leon hadn't even bothered to contact her or apologize to her after she left, and she said that she was holding me responsible for this because she believed that I had known all about his abusive behavior. But I had hidden it from her because I wanted to punish her. And she thought that it was really cruel of me to do so because apparently she had done me a favor by not fighting for anything during the divorce, and I couldn't even have her back and make sure that she was safe. It was just really stupid because, like I said, I had worked with Leon for a really long time, and I knew him well, but that was all in a professional capacity, and in the workplace he was a very different guy. I had never dated him and had only occasionally met the women he had dated in the past, so there was really no way that I could have known about this side of him. Her accusations that I had hidden all this on purpose didn't make any sense to me, and I felt pretty annoyed by how she was acting like I owed this to her or something. I tried to explain to her that I had no idea about any of this and said that I was really sorry that this was happening to her, but ultimately, it was her own fault, and she could threaten me with lawsuits all she wanted. But she knew that this was not my fault. She just kept arguing with me, insisting that I knew about all of this, and she is now going to make sure that she fights for everything that she didn't during our divorce. My daughter had been standing by the door all this while, and I had pretty much forgotten about her because I was so caught up in the argument. But once we started talking in circles, she interrupted Kathy and told her to go away. I was a bit surprised because I didn't think she was going to interrupt, and I think even Kathy was caught off guard. But then Kathy told her to shut up and stay out of this because she wasn't even old enough to know what this was about and told her to go to bed. But my daughter refused. She stayed there and said that Kathy had no right to speak to me this way, especially after everything that she had put me through. She told her that for the last couple of months, ever since I had found out that she had cheated, I had been heartbroken, and she, the selfish and heartless monster that she is, just simply moved on with her life. She then reminded her mother that she had not even come to visit her own daughter or even bothered to keep in touch with her because she was so busy with Leon and her new life. My daughter told Kathy that she had failed at being a good wife, and she had failed at being a mother as well. So she had absolutely no business standing there and acting like she was the victim in the situation that she had created for herself. My daughter is just 14, but hearing her say those words really put into perspective how much she had grown up because of the divorce. Kathy literally had nothing to say because she was speechless at our daughter's words. And then my daughter finally said that now that Kathy had left and she was with Leon, she would just have to deal with whatever she was going through on her own because we were no longer her family anymore. She had dug her grave, and she had to lie in it because that would be exactly what she deserved for screwing people over. Once she had said that, my daughter slammed the door in Kathy's face and went back to her room. I could hear Kathy crying outside the door, but I didn't bother to check up on her because I didn't think it was necessary after the discussion we had just had. So I also went back to bed and tried not to think about it for the next couple of days and kept myself busy at work. I was very proud of my daughter for standing up for me and not letting me fall weak in front of Kathy. Things were going pretty well after that visit, but 3 days back, Kathy showed up once again, and this time she had shown up with a lawyer to demand full custody of our daughter. Luckily, our daughter was out with a couple of her friends at the time when she visited in the evening, so I haven't told her anything about this yet. But I was incredibly pissed off when she showed up and said that after our daughter had spoken to her in that way the last time that we met, she had decided there was no way she was going to allow her to live with me anymore. She told me that apparently the real reason she had not tried to keep in touch with our daughter after I found out about the affair was that she did not want to get involved in a drawn-out custody battle and disrupt my life, even more than she already had, which is why she wanted to leave quietly. And she didn't even try to keep in touch with our daughter because she knew that I was upset about what was going on, and her keeping in touch with our daughter might have made things worse. So she was basically trying to tell me that she had done all of this for my sake, not just because she wanted to leave without any responsibilities. I was obviously not buying any of that, and I told her that I knew that the only reason she did not fight for anything during the divorce, let alone custody of our daughter, was because she wanted to move away as quickly as she could and start a new life with Leon. This had nothing to do with me, like she was trying to make it seem, so I really didn't need to feel bad for her. But she said that she didn't care about that anymore because now she wanted full custody of her daughter, and she was going to make sure that she got it because she was not going to allow me to ruin my daughter's perception of her by feeding her nonsensical stories and teaching her to disrespect her mother. She claimed that apparently the last time that we met, our daughter had been incredibly disrespectful to her, and instead of reprimanding her, I was encouraging that behavior. So now she knew what to do, and she had come back to inform me that she would be taking this to court. I told her to be my guest and shut the door because I really didn't want to speak to her anymore and waste my time. But now I'm starting to think about whether she has a point or not. I want to believe that I'm doing the right thing, but as of now, I'm not sure of anything anymore, to be honest. So, ITA for not reprimanding my daughter when she was rude to her mother, my ex-wife? Update 1. I have decided that I have nothing to be sorry about. My daughter did exactly the right thing by standing up for me, and the comments made me realize just how stupid I was being. She literally cheated on me. I don't think I have to have any sympathy or any kind of regret about what has happened to her. And many people in the comments even told me that I had to speak to my daughter about this beforehand since it would not be fair for her to be caught off guard in case Kathy files for full custody even after the last meeting. So I spoke to my daughter about it yesterday, and I told her everything. I did not want to keep secrets from her. She has already proven to me that she is mature enough to handle these things, and I do feel kind of bad that she had to grow up overnight, but at least now I can prepare her for the future. So far, we have not received any word from Kathy, but we're guessing that we're going to hear from her soon. Our daughter is 14, and that's old enough for her to count in court, given that this even goes to court. If we are able to settle during mediation, that's going to be better. But just in case, I have still made sure that she really wants to stay with me, and obviously, she does. She has made it abundantly clear to me that she wants nothing to do with Kathy, not right now at least. She told me that in the future, she might consider reconnecting with Kathy and building a relationship with her again, but right now, everything is just too recent. She obviously blames her mother for breaking up the family, and I can't say anything because technically it's true. I don't want to be the kind of father who turns his kid against his ex-partner just to be petty, but in this situation, I don't think there's much that I can do. I think Kathy did the job pretty well herself, since our daughter really wants to keep her distance from her own mother, and they used to be pretty close before the affair came to light. So this is a huge change from what they were both used to. Obviously, Kathy is upset that my daughter is on my side here, since she has always tried to be closer to her. Speaking of which, some of you wanted to know who exactly had told our daughter about the affair. So it was not me, it was Kathy herself, and she had confessed about it in an email to our daughter a couple of days after she had moved out, without even bothering to ask me if I wanted that. My daughter was very upset when she found out, and in spite of that, she still wanted to speak to her mother just once. But Kathy was the one who refused back then. When I tried to contact her to tell her that our daughter wanted to speak to her and discuss these things, she said that she did not want to speak to our daughter about it because she was much too busy with the divorce proceedings, and also she did not think it was appropriate to be discussed. She had said whatever she wanted to say in that email itself, and she had nothing more to add. I tried to convince her to talk to our daughter just once because she seemed to have a lot of questions. But Kathy was very firm about her decision. After that, she stopped speaking to us at all, so my daughter's perception of her mother changed completely. And I don't think that it's fair for Kathy to hold me responsible for all of that. Anyway, I have spoken to my lawyer and we are going to deal with this. Update 2. So a couple of days back, I was finally served with a notice for full custody by Kathy, and my lawyer and I immediately responded to it by contesting it. We are going to meet with the court-appointed mediator tomorrow, but before that, Leon called me up today. I was quite surprised to see him calling because it was not like we had anything to talk about, but I still answered the call. As soon as I did that, he told me that he wanted me to send Kathy back to him. He said that he had been trying to get through to her for the past couple of days, and he knew that she must have been with me, or at least spoken to me, and wanted me to tell him where she was. I told him that I had no idea where she was living, but I had indeed spoken to her in the past couple of days, and she was here to fight for custody of our daughter. I did not do this to help Leon, just to be clear, but I did this because I thought that maybe if Leon came by and spoke to Kathy, then he could change her mind and get her to go back. If I was lucky, maybe he would even be able to convince her to sign away her rights over our daughter. So with that in mind, I told him everything, and I also added that she was pretty distraught by the fact that he had not bothered to contact her after she had left that night, and if he wanted her back, then he should make a move quickly. The poor guy did not even suspect anything, and he had no idea that he was being manipulated, so that worked out pretty well for me. I'm just hoping that Kathy still wants to make it work with him, and when he comes by, she might go back with him. I told my lawyer about this plan as well, and even he thinks that what I did was the right thing to do, because even though the scales are tilted in our favor already, it doesn't hurt to save time and energy and just get this over with before this goes to court or whatever. Update 3. Hey, so Kathy and I met for our first mediation session 2 days ago, and of course it did not go well. She did not agree with any of our statements, and claimed that it was all a waste of time before terminating the session within half an hour. After she left, I went back home after picking up my daughter from school, and once we got back, Leon was waiting for us at our doorstep. The poor guy looked like he was in a really bad state, and I can imagine him being in that condition after spending a couple of months with Kathy. Anyway, I told him that he had to leave because my daughter and I had just come back home and we wanted to relax. We did not have time to deal with this drama, and I had already helped him however I could. I was not able to go out of my way to help the guy who had been having an affair with my wife. But he literally broke down and said that after their last fight, she had not even bothered to reply to any of his texts, and he had no idea where to look for her. So I told him, just like the last time, I still had no idea where she was living, and there was no way that I could help him. He just sat down on the porch steps and started crying with his head in his hands. And at that point, I started getting kind of annoyed because this guy and Kathy had literally ruined my life. And now he felt comfortable enough to ask me to help him find that woman so that they could sort things out. I told my daughter to go inside so I could deal with this, and once she was inside, I told Leon that he had to go because I was simply done with both of them for good measure. I gave him Kathy's parents' contact info and told him to get in touch with them if he couldn't get through to Kathy, but he had to leave us alone now. I told him that he had ruined my life along with Kathy, and I didn't want to see him lurking around ever again. He tried to apologize to me and said that he really didn't mean to hurt me, but he had fallen in love with her, and he couldn't help it. But I didn't want to hear it, so I just didn't say anything, and so he left. I'm just so exhausted and confused all the time that I don't even know what I'm doing with my life right now. I'm really hoping and praying that Leon and Kathy are able to make things right for my sake, if not theirs, because if they are, it's likely that they are going to leave me and my daughter alone, and I will finally be allowed to move on with my life. At this point, I don't even know what's going on and how I should feel about anything. I'm just numb for the most part, and I can't wait for this to come to an end. Update 4. Hello. So a couple of days ago, Kathy terminated our mediation sessions and said that she wanted our situation to go to court. That would not end well for her, and we all knew that, but I guess she wasn't in denial until now. Anyway, she visited me a couple of hours ago with Leon. I guess they were able to patch things up. I did not invite them in because my daughter was home, and she was kind of sick, so I didn't want to make that worse for her. So I told them to wait for me in a nearby cafe, got my mother to come by to take care of my daughter, and then headed to the same cafe so that we could talk things out. When I got there, Kathy and Leon apologized for everything they had put me through, and yet again, I had to tell them that this did not matter to me anymore, and I just wanted them to move on and talk about why exactly they had called me here. I did not want to waste my time with insincere apologies and stuff, so they stopped beating about the bush as well, and they told me that they had realized that they had made a mistake by screwing me over, and they were not happy at all in Boston. Kathy really missed our daughter, and Leon missed being his own boss. So now Kathy wanted me to agree to send our daughter to see her every weekend, or at least every other weekend, because she didn't want to give up the life that she had. And Leon's demands were a bit more outrageous. He wanted to come back as a partner in the business and start a branch in Boston. The best part of all of this was that they wanted me to make a decision within a couple of days, because Kathy had been told by her employers that she needed to come back if she wanted to keep her job because she couldn't keep working from home anymore. So even if I wanted to tell them that I would think about it, I did not have that choice. That's why I ended up telling them that there was no way I was going to be agreeing to any of that. Leon had already resigned and sold his shares. I had that on paper, so I was not hiring him back again because I did not trust him even one bit. Kathy's proposition was ridiculous because our daughter does not deserve a life where she has to travel back and forth every other weekend just to be able to see her own mother. She should have thought about these things before she moved away to Boston. This is not my fault at all. They started to argue with me, saying that they were willing to come to common ground with me because they really didn't want to fight this out in court. So I told them that the idea that they could fight what they wanted in court and actually win was laughable. The only reason they wanted to bargain with me in person was because they thought that they could get to me. Unfortunately, I was not weak and stupid enough to fall for any of this. The only reason I had even come to meet them was because I wanted to put an end to all of this. That really shut them up because even they were aware of the fact that they would never be able to win if this went to court. The most that I could do for them, for Kathy to be more specific, was talk to our daughter and get her to agree to meet Kathy whenever she visited. But beyond that, I was not doing anything. So they could either take it or leave it because I was not going to waste more of my time arguing with them. Kathy seemed pretty desperate, so she agreed readily, and then I left. I'm going to speak to my daughter when she gets better, but I'm not going to force her to do anything that she doesn't want to. So if she decides that she doesn't want to see her mother again, that's up to her. I'm not going to be convincing her. Update 5. Hi, so a couple of months have passed, and in my last update, I mentioned that I was not going to force my daughter to meet her mother if she didn't want to. I spoke to my daughter after that and told her what I had said to Kathy, and she said that she needed some time to think things over. So I communicated the same to Kathy a couple of months back. And since then, we have had no contact. I don't know if she and Leon have been able to resolve their fights. I don't really care about any of that. But from what I know, they are still together and living in Boston. Good for them, I guess. At least they have left me alone, and now I can finally try and move on, and that's exactly what I'm doing. The best revenge is living well, so I'm just focusing on working and bringing up my daughter to be a good human being, nothing like her mother, basically. I hope I succeed in doing that.
Story 3.
I was ready for work, seated at the breakfast table with my coffee and the morning paper, while Janet was still getting dressed in the bedroom. This morning seemed just like any other workday of the past year. As I skimmed the front page, there it was, right in the middle, as Carmine had predicted last night. Carmine always follows through on his promises. The news article reported a man found executed in his garage. Robert Toldson, an employee of Calcas Realty Agency, was found dead, having been thumped and then strangled. Janet also works at Calcas Realty. Currently, the police have no suspects, and the investigation is just beginning. There was no need to read further. I folded the paper and placed it on the table where Janet always sits. A warm, comforting feeling washed over me as I contemplated the events leading up to this morning. Sipping my coffee, I watched as Janet entered the breakfast area. My, was she beautiful. My wife of 5 years looked even more stunning today than she did 7 years ago when we first met. There were no exchanged greetings as she poured herself a cup of coffee. It's hard to believe how much our marriage had declined in the past year. Our eyes met briefly, and I smiled slightly as I acknowledged her arrival. She said nothing to me, continuing a pattern that had persisted for the past 2 months after our major argument about her increased working hours. She seemed to withdraw into herself, displaying a coldness that contrasted sharply with her warmth during our courtship. I missed that closeness dearly. Now it seemed like it was all coming to an end. Janet picked up the paper in one hand and her coffee cup in the other. Her eyes scanned the headlines, and suddenly she spat out her coffee, her eyes fixed on the article about Robert Tolson's homicide. "Oh God, no," she cried out, looking as if she were about to vomit as she rushed to the bathroom. I sat there in silence, knowing there was nothing I needed to say to her about the subject. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, placed my coffee cup in the dishwasher, and grabbed my briefcase. I went out to the garage and got into my car, not bothering to check on Janet's well-being. It didn't matter to me anymore how she was feeling. Now, let me introduce myself. My name is John Cannella, but my friends call me JC. I'm 29 years old, of Sicilian descent in the Italian section of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My youth was mostly spent getting into trouble with a gang of other young Italian boys. We fancied ourselves as the Junior Mafia. I'll skip over most of the other misadventures we got into and focus on the one event that significantly changed my direction. Carmine Vitalio and I were closer than two natural brothers. We were the same age and hung out with the same group of guys. The main difference between Carmine and me was brain power. I won't claim Carmine was unintelligent or anything of the sort. It's just that he seemed incapable of avoiding trouble with the law. Despite our shared misdeeds, he was the one who typically got caught by the police. One evening, Carmine and I broke into a warehouse near the dock, hoping to steal some items for quick cash. The security guards must have spotted us entering through a side window because they were waiting as we tried to leave with several boxes of MP3 players. One guard nabbed Carmine just as I turned, while another tried to grab me. I pushed a box into his face and then leaped onto the other guard's back, striking him on the side of his head with all my strength. As he released Carmine, I pulled him to the ground, urging him to flee as fast as he could. Carmine ran off, leaving me behind. The second guard recovered and grabbed me from behind, and there wasn't much of a struggle after that. The guards roughed me up until the cops arrived. When they showed up, they laughed with the guards as they examined my bruised and bloodied body. I was taken to the police station and held in a cell until my parents came to get me released. Long story short, I never revealed the identity of my accomplice in the warehouse. I received 2 weeks in jail and probation. Carmine called me multiple times to apologize for leaving me behind, but I reassured him it was fine, considering his prior record could have landed him in jail for much longer. He vowed to make it up to me, no matter how long it took. My parents were furious and embarrassed by my arrest. My dad disciplined me with his leather belt until I was almost bleeding, and then they decided to enroll me in St. Peter's Catholic High School to straighten me out. Needless to say, the nuns and the priest did an excellent job of disciplining me. By my senior year, I had changed my lifestyle. One of the priests who mentored me encouraged me to pursue a different path, so I left the neighborhood gang and eventually performed well enough to be accepted to Penn State again. In short, I succeeded in college and graduated with a degree in human resources. Finding a job with a reputable company after graduation was easy. For once, my parents were proud of me. Though I dated numerous women in college, I wasn't ready for a serious commitment. It wasn't until 3 years after graduating that I met Janet Ficanio, who made me reconsider my bachelorhood. We met at a seminar for HR representatives. Afterward, I got her phone number and promised to call her, which seemed to please her. Janet was unlike any other woman I had dated, with a multifaceted personality. At times, she reminded me of Chris Costner's character in The 3 Faces of Eve. The trait I least admired about Janet was her stubbornness. Once she formed an opinion on an issue, nothing could dissuade her from her belief, no matter how misguided it might be. Our dating experience was characterized by periods of closeness, followed by distance. We refrained from engaging in carnal activity. Within the first year of our relationship, I learned of Janet's abandonment as an infant. Her mother left her in a church pew and departed from her life, leading to her upbringing in orphanages and foster homes. I firmly believe that the absence of maternal love and care during her formative years contributed significantly to Janet's personality struggles. Despite her challenges, Janet remained the most affectionate and warm-hearted person I had ever known. During our early years together, my parents did not support my relationship with Janet, Throughout our courtship, they cautioned me about becoming too involved with her, but I disregarded their advice. Janet and I exchanged vows in a modest ceremony at our local church. We both agreed to postpone starting a family until we were financially stable, and Janet could transition to being a full-time mother, a decision that my parents disapproved of. Trouble emerged in our marriage during the third year when Janet's company was acquired by a larger corporation, resulting in the loss of her job. She struggled with depression due to losing a job she valued. Although we weren't facing financial hardship, it took several months for Janet to secure a new job, which she wasn't enthusiastic about, an office manager position at the Calcas Realty Agency. I made an effort to support Janet during her period of unemployment, but at times, I felt she resented my fulfilling job while she settled for less. She experienced significant mood swings, particularly during her monthly cycle. After a few months at Calcas, she gradually regained her usual pleasant demeanor. Our situation improved, including our bed life, which had suffered during her unemployment. There were moments in our bedroom when I sensed Janet was trying hard to compensate for the rough patch by being more assertive in our lovemaking. For about 9 months, I didn't complain, and our married life thrived. Janet became more enthusiastic about her job and even pursued a home study course in real estate. I was pleased with her transformation and the loving wife she was to me. Then, amidst challenging circumstances, came both good and bad news. The good news was my steady advancement up the management ladder at my company. After 5 years with them, my future looked promising. However, a merger with an Atlanta-based company led to significant changes in my job responsibilities. The Atlanta company was to be integrated into our corporate structure, giving me the responsibility to train their personnel and make necessary staff reductions. I was excited about the new challenges, but the downside was that I would be traveling more frequently and for longer periods away from home. Janet was not pleased with the prospect of my increased time on the road, even though I made efforts to be home for weekends during longer trips. Initially, Janet's anger about my frequent absences seemed to be appeased, but, as is often the case, complications arose. Gradually, my return home on weekends proved insufficient to compensate for my extended time away. Janet entrenched herself in a stubborn mindset, accusing me of enjoying my absence and even insinuating that I might have a lover in Atlanta. Despite my efforts, including calling her during the day and sending flowers and humorous cards, her aloofness persisted. Completing the staff training in Atlanta took nearly 6 months, marking the conclusion of my travels. Additionally, I received a promotion at corporate headquarters, expecting these changes to improve Janet's perception of me. However, it appeared I was mistaken. Once I stopped traveling, Janet increased her workload at the agency. When I questioned her about it, she sarcastically remarked that it was her turn to work for a promotion and suggested it was time for me to experience solitude in the evenings. Our closeness suffered. 2 weeks ago, Janet informed me that she and her colleagues would be away for the weekend, attending a developer's session for high-rise condominiums near the riverfront. She deemed it essential for her career advancement without consulting me about her absence, leaving no room for discussion. Even though I stopped running with the junior mafia back in high school, I stayed close with some of my best pals, especially Carmine. I rang him up and asked if he wanted to catch the Steelers versus Raiders game on Sunday. Without hesitation, he agreed, knowing how to score the best tickets for Steelers games. I mentioned Janet's business trip, so Carmine suggested I spend the weekend with him and the guys, catching up on neighborhood gossip. The idea of a weekend away from home sounded fantastic, so I didn't bother telling Janet my plans. Friday morning was chilly, and over breakfast, I casually inquired about reaching Janet while she was away. She coolly brushed off the idea, saying she'd be with influential people and didn't want interruptions. It felt like she saw me as a nagging parent rather than a husband. I let it go, and later that day, Janet left for Atlantic City. Meeting up with Carmine was a real reunion. It had been over a year since we last hung out. I was one of the few who managed to leave the old neighborhood without ending up behind bars. Carmine also mentioned a debt he owed me, promising to help me out whenever I needed. Saturday night, we hit up the Sweet Kitty Cat Lounge on the southeast side, a strip joint reminiscent of the Bada Bing Club from The Sopranos. The place was packed with scantily clad dancers, just like in the show. A young woman, who seemed not much older than her 18th birthday, approached and danced provocatively in front of me. Carmine mentioned that she was available for the night, placing emphasis on the idea that she could be mine if I wanted. During this, he engaged in inappropriate physical contact. In response, I expressed my commitment to marital vows, acknowledging my temptation, but affirming that loyalty and fidelity hold significance for me. I declined the advances of the alluring stripper, and she moved on to another interested male customer. Carmine, expressing disbelief, commented that I seemed really serious about the fidelity thing. I affirmed my stance, stating that without fidelity, there would be nothing. No love, no marriage. The next morning brought the typical cold, windy Pittsburgh weather, but that didn't deter the horde of fans trekking to Three Rivers Stadium for the Steelers vs. Raiders game. The bitter rivalry between these two football teams borders on gang warfare since the Steelers snatched victory from the jaws of defeat in one of the NFL's most memorable moments. With a fortunate bounce, Franco Harris found himself on the end of an unlikely reception, changing the outcome of a fantastic defensive struggle with the Oakland Raiders in the first-ever playoff game at Pittsburgh's Three Rivers Stadium. Neither team has forgotten that legacy. It's a good thing weapons are not permitted on the playing field. The Steelers weren't having a great year at this point in the season, with a record of 5 wins and 5 losses. Today marked the biggest game of the season, with the silver and black back in town. It was hard headbanging all afternoon on the football field. I was getting hoarse from all the shouting and screaming, but the final score was Steelers 21, Raiders 20. The day couldn't have ended on a better note, or so I thought. Despite Carmine's invitation to celebrate, I had to bow out and tell him another time. Tomorrow would be a hard day at the office, and I knew I didn't need a hangover on top of all the other job pressures. Besides, Janet was coming home this evening, and I wanted to be there when she got home. However, Janet did not come home Sunday night. I left for work Monday morning with serious doubts in my mind about the latest developments in my marriage. There had been a sense of impending doom whenever I thought deeply about the state of the relationship between Janet and myself. Sure, there were rough patches in all marriages, but maybe our marriage had decayed into something more than just a rough patch. The workday was as hectic as expected when I left home in the morning, with several high-level meetings and a persecution lawsuit brought against the company high on my agenda. It wasn't until 5:30 that I had a chance to sit down and check my emails. There were a dozen emails from the staff, along with the latest information on the lawsuit. Near the end of the list of emails, there was one titled, "Who was the last one to know?" As I opened the email, anticipating a humorous animated cartoon, I was suddenly confronted with a photo of Janet and another man engaged in a passionate embrace and a lip-locked kiss. At the bottom of the photo, there was a text message that simply suggested, "Want to know what happened after this? Click on the next link." A cold chill raised up my spine as I hesitated for a moment, staring at the photo of Janet kissing another man. Then I clicked on the next link. The screen flashed up another photo. This time, Janet and the man she was kissing were both unclothed and standing together in a motel room. Again, at the bottom of the photo was a text message that simply said, "Want to know what happened after this? Click on the next link." My hand was trembling. There was a tightness in my throat and chest as the unclothed image of my wife burned itself into my brain. There was a part of me that did not want to see the next photo. Still, I knew I had to click on the link. The next photo was the end of my marriage, with Janet on the bed on all fours, with the same man as in the other 2 photos, displaying an expression of lust and ecstasy on her face. The sole woman I ever wholeheartedly loved turned out to be an unfaithful adulteress. I placed my love and trust in her entirely, and now she was tearing my heart from my chest. The text at the photo's bottom read, "Prick provided by Robert Toldson." My worst nightmare had been thrust in my face. Undoubtedly, Janet's recent coldness wasn't merely a wife upset with her husband. It resembled rigor mortis setting into our dying marriage. What followed? Anger and rage. For me, it was a calm resolve, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. Revenge settled into my mind, as infidelity and betrayal wouldn't stand in my lifetime. 2 people would pay dearly for knowingly heaping insults upon me. My initial thoughts revolved around the person sending incriminating emails. No name or indication of the sender's identity. Questions echoed in my head. Why send this email? What did they hope to gain by exposing my wife's infidelity? Were they friends or enemies of Janet? I'd have to address these questions later. I inserted a CD into my computer, copied the email and 3 photos, then deleted it. A scrubber program erased all evidence from my hard drive. Sitting back in my swivel chair, making sense of Janet's betrayal, I could only attribute it to her multiple personalities. Yet, if she wanted a divorce, I would have granted it, and we both could have walked away from this marriage wreck. But now, my revenge would be swift and complete. I'd show no mercy to either of them. The plan began to solidify in my mind. Leaving the office, I found a payphone around the corner. Dialing an untraceable pay-as-you-go cell phone, I informed Carmine that I believed it was time for me to collect on the debt he owed me. Upon returning home around 7:30, I found Janet already there, watching TV. She didn't rush to greet me but commented on my late arrival, saying I was coming home late. In response, I noted that she was also coming home late as I moved to the kitchen. Silence hung between us. I grabbed a beer and headed to my office, ensuring to lock the door. In our country, a person convicted of a capital crime usually gets one of 2 sentences: the pass-away penalty or life in prison. My revenge plan involved 1 pass-away penalty and 1 life sentence. I needed some quiet time to finalize my revenge plan. Carmine would handle Mr. Robert Toldson, and I'd personally settle the score with Janet. To make the revenge appear as a simple case of a wife leaving her husband, I sent flowers to Janet's office and made dinner reservations near her workplace. I left messages for her to meet me, but she never showed up. I instructed the maitre d' to give our table to someone else, ensuring he'd remember my wife standing me up. Janet returned home that evening without offering any explanation or reason for missing our dinner reservation. The fact of the matter was, I had no interest in anything she might have said in defiance. The die had been cast, and the wheels of revenge were set in motion. The following day, a courier came to my office and handed me an envelope marked personal and confidential. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with a bold heading instructing to destroy it after reading. The first sentence on the paper advised me to secure an airtight alibi for the upcoming night. The second sentence provided a name, Carlos Mandara, and a phone number. I read and reread the phone number until I had it memorized. The paper was then sent through the shredder, and I collected the shredded pieces to be discreetly dropped into various trash cans outside the office building that evening. I arrived home before Janet, changed clothes, poured a tall Jim Beam, and sat down to listen to some smooth jazz. The TV remained off. It was to be my night as king of my castle. Janet had to find her own entertainment. There was no confrontation when she got home. She quickly assessed the scene and turned around, walking out the door again. I couldn't care less about her destination, whether out to eat or to meet Robert Toldson. The sand in the hourglass was almost empty for both of them. I was in bed when Janet finally returned, slipping quietly alongside me. Silence was the loudest noise before I fell asleep. Thursday evenings were the usual poker night for some guys from work, held in the back room of the old Stagecoach bar. This served as my airtight alibi for the rest of the evening. This time, I was the one slipping into bed early in the morning. The clock on my nightstand read 2:35 as I pulled the covers over me. Not a sound or movement from Janet. Falling asleep wasn't difficult, even though I knew what had taken place earlier that evening. Now that Robert Toldson had faced his pass-away penalty, it was time to mete out punishment to the second perpetrator. Immediate action wasn't required for the life imprisonment penalty. Janet's punishment would commence after a phone call, providing a sense of satisfaction and justice. Whatever it was in Janet's warped personality that led her to blatantly disrespect me was for someone else to determine. I no longer felt any compassion toward the woman I once loved with all my heart and soul. The impending retribution was of her own making. The police interviewed every member of the Calcas Realty Agency staff, gathering interesting but inconsistent statements. Janet faced multiple police interviews. Detective Lawrence Bacht questioned me about Robert Toldson, attempting to bait questions about a more than professional relationship between Robert and Janet. I affirmed my complete faith in my wife's fidelity, dismissing any doubt. He just smiled at me, perhaps pitying me as a poor betrayed man. The funeral service for Robert Toldson took place on Tuesday. That morning, I observed Janet wearing her somber black dress, the same one she had worn to my mother's funeral. She didn't inquire if I wanted to accompany her to Robert's funeral. Whatever thoughts she had regarding Robert's pass away, she kept to herself. Undoubtedly, she had much to ponder, including the homicide and her infidelity. Over the following week, Janet appeared eager to engage in a serious discussion about our relationship. However, my cold shoulder promptly halted her attempts. I had moved beyond any possibility of reconciliation or making amends. I held the power to end the charade whenever I chose. 3 weeks after Robert's homicide, police investigations seemed to lose momentum. No new leads emerged, and there were suggestions that Robert might have been executed by a loan shark or a bookie. During this period, Janet's mental state continued to decline, marked by increased absent-mindedness and confusion. Little things frightened her, yet I offered no assistance or solace, even witnessing her struggle. I thought to myself, too bad, as I observed her slowly unravel. Finally, on the subsequent Thursday, I placed the call to Carlos. The plan was already set, and he was eager to set it in motion. Janet had only hours left before her new life would begin. Friday morning, I left for work before Janet was dressed, deliberately avoiding a final encounter in my house. The sand in the hourglass had run out. Across the street from our house, a car with 2 men lay in wait. The kidnapping unfolded at a 4-way stop sign intersection, with vehicles in front and behind Janet's car preventing any escape. With the precision of a Delta Force team, 2 men acted swiftly. As the driver's door opened, a needle punctured her arm while the seatbelt was cut away. Janet was pushed into the passenger seat, and one of the men took the driver's seat. The 3 vehicles departed rapidly, the entire process lasting less than 30 seconds. No witnesses were present. At 11 o'clock that morning, in a branch bank on the east side of town, a woman made up to look exactly like Janet entered and handed a withdrawal slip for $25,000 from our joint account to the teller. She presented a driver's license and passport as proof of identity. The teller took a few minutes to issue the withdrawal in the form of a cashier's check. A guard escorted the woman to her car, noting the license plate as she drove away. The line at the American Airlines ticket counter was short. The Janet lookalike approached the counter, presented her photo ID and passport, and received the boarding pass. Flight reservations had been made online the previous night. The first leg of the journey was to JFK Airport, followed by a non-stop flight on number 951 to Rio de Janeiro. The Pittsburgh departure was at 4:45 in the afternoon, reaching JFK, New York. Subsequently, at 10:30 that evening, the American Airlines plane took off, carrying the passenger, Janet Canella, on an overnight flight to Brazil. I waited until noon on Saturday before contacting the police to report a missing person. Surprisingly, Detective Lawrence Backton was the officer who arrived at the house to take the report. I informed him that Janet had not returned home at her usual time. Attempts to reach her on her cell phone were futile, as it displayed a non-in-service notification. When I contacted Amanda Stoccata, one of Janet's close friends at Calcas Realty, she revealed that Janet had not shown up for work the previous day and hadn't even called in to report her absence. Detective Backton made cryptic notes in his notepad, while occasionally glancing up at me. Eventually, he began questioning the state of my marriage, probing into potential problems that might be related to Janet's disappearance. I reiterated what I had told him after Robert Tolson's homicide investigation. Our marriage was fine, and I couldn't fathom any reason for Janet to voluntarily vanish. He then inquired if I had any involvement in foul play concerning Janet, to which I emphatically stated my love for my wife and my inability to damage her. Lying to the police was a skill I developed early in life, associating with the junior mafia, and it continued to serve me well. 3 days later, Detective Backton visited my office during business hours, presumably to assess the husband he was dealing with. Once in my office, he sat down and offered a tight-lipped smile. I wore a distressed husband's expression as I questioned him about any news regarding Janet's whereabouts. He responded, stating that they had retraced Janet's activities after she left my house on Friday morning, providing some information with a mix of positive and negative aspects. Several witnesses claimed to have seen her having coffee at Denny's restaurant on Bennett Street around 10 o'clock on Friday morning. Detective Backton informed me that Janet had appeared at the Allegheny National Bank around 11 o'clock, as captured on video surveillance. She made a $25,000 withdrawal from our joint savings account. As he shared this information, I expressed disbelief and questioned how it was possible, stating that Janet hadn't mentioned anything about wanting to withdraw money. Detective Backton assured me that the facts were clear, explaining that the cashier had made photocopies of Janet's driver's license and passport before issuing the cashier's check. He was confident that when I saw the surveillance tape, I would identify the person at the cashier's window as my wife, Janet. Once again, Detective Backton paused to gauge my reaction to his revelation. I expressed to the detective that I believed there must be some mistake, emphasizing that Janet and I discussed everything happening in our marriage. I maintained a bewildered look while staring back at the police detective, aware that he was saving the most devastating news for last, and I had to prepare for another acting performance. The detective went on to share the most disturbing news, stating that my wife had purchased airline tickets to New York and then to Rio de Janeiro. He mentioned that they located her car in the long-term parking lot at the airport, revealing that her flight left Pittsburgh on Friday afternoon at 4:45, and her flight to Rio left New York at 10:30. The detective informed me that they contacted the Rio de Janeiro police to locate Janet, but she seemed to have vanished once she arrived in Rio. Detective Backton now stared intently at me, awaiting my response. I exclaimed that it was madness and stated that Janet would never do something like that. I emphasized my belief in her love for me and mine for her, expressing that leaving the country was absurd. In an attempt to portray the betrayed husband, I began to cry right in front of the detective. There was a moment of silence in my office before the detective resumed talking. He asked if I believed this had any connection to the homicide of Robert Toldson. In response, I questioned how he could even ask that, asserting that my wife had no involvement in the homicide. I reminded him that she was interviewed and never charged in connection with that case. The detective clarified that they never charged my wife, but she was high on their suspect list. I responded to the detective's statement about others suggesting my wife and Mr. Toldson were romantically involved. Expressing disbelief, I asserted that it was absurd to accuse her of being linked to the Toldson homicide, emphasizing that more than office gossip was needed to support such a claim. My eyes bore into his as I challenged the credibility of the accusations. The detective explained that they were still investigating, and now that my wife was out of the country, suspicions about her role in the homicide had grown. He paused for a moment and shared that evidence at the crime scene indicated a carnal motive, with Toldson being tortured and thumped for hours before being strangled. In response, I emitted a small laugh, dismissing the idea that my petite wife could have committed such a crime. I questioned the detective's belief in her capability, stating that she could barely open a pickle jar, let alone strangle someone. I expressed frustration with the escalating and seemingly baseless accusations. I addressed Detective Backton, acknowledging that all the evidence thus far pointed to my wife's involvement, and he suggested she may have had assistance. Surprised, I questioned the possibility of being that other person before he could say more. He explained that they considered the possibility, but assured me that I had a solid alibi for the time of the homicide. However, his voice lacked conviction. I summarized the situation, expressing my disbelief that they believed my wife had left the country due to her involvement in a homicide and that I was a likely suspect in assisting her. Pausing to glare directly at him, I sought clarification, asking if I accurately summarized his statements. He sat there, assessing whether my indignation was genuine or not. Conveying a hint of scorn in my voice, I informed the detective that if there was nothing else, the meeting was over. Rising from my desk, I approached the closed door and opened it, signaling his departure. Dr. Backton got up from his chair and moved slowly to the door. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Cannella. I'll keep you informed about your wife's disappearance." He didn't extend his hand, and I didn't offer mine. After the detective left, I closed the door and settled back in my swivel chair. I was sure Dr. Backton's visit aimed to extract more information than provide substantial details about the two cases. I carefully pondered each statement and question, realizing he suspected my involvement. Yet my alibis were solid. I was playing poker the night Robert Toldson was executed, and I was in meetings all day the Friday when Janet went missing. It was Saturday morning, 2 weeks after Janet's disappearance. I hadn't heard from Carlos or Carmine, Janet's whereabouts and well-being remained unknown. At times I sensed being followed, morning commutes and evening returns. My actions were meticulously planned, from work to home, with grocery shopping on the way. Nothing suggested evasion or someone trying to conceal. Every other day, I called Detective Bacton for updates on my missing wife, but he had no new information. The Brazilian police found no evidence of Janet after her arrival in Rio. Later that afternoon, I ordered a pizza from Domino's. While watching college football on TV, the doorbell rang, and the pizza delivery guy arrived with my hot pizza. I paid him and offered a couple of bucks as a tip. Upon opening the pizza box in the kitchen, I noticed an envelope on top. Opening it, I pulled out a sheet of paper with instructions for the next day. It directed me to dress for church and attend the 10 o'clock Mass at St. Peter's. The note further instructed me to slip out the side door on the east side of the church during communion, where a dark Ford Crown Victoria would be waiting outside. Holding the sheet, I understood that this would be a final meeting with Janet before Carlos shipped her out of the country. He had waited 2 weeks to ensure the well-documented COVID plan of Janet flying out of the country was all the evidence the police had to work on. Carlos set up an elaborate deception to mislead the investigation, establishing that Janet was alive when she boarded the plane to Rio. This prevented the police from making a circumstantial case against me, even though there was no body to be found. The bedroom was pitch black as I stared at the ceiling. This past month and a half had been a living nightmare for me after receiving that email. The chain of events reminded me that my ancestral roots would always bring out a dark side of my personality. Whenever I was disrespected by anyone, nature or nurture, there was no doubt in my mind where my dark side came from. St. Peter's is a large church, and the 10 o'clock Mass is highly attended by several hundred parishioners. It was easy to get lost in that crowd and spot if anyone was following me. If the police trailed me, they must have waited outside the church as the throng of people moved to the front of the church for communion. I quickly slipped out the side door. The dark Ford sedan was waiting with the motor running, and I got into the back seat as the car roared into the busy street. The trip took about 10 minutes before the big sedan pulled up in front of a large warehouse building. The driver never turned around, instructing me to enter the building through the side door. Inside the large empty building, there was an office area near the back, with light coming from several windows. As I approached, Carlos stepped out and walked toward me, marking our first face-to-face meeting. Carlos greeted me, mentioning that Carmine said it was all right to call me JC. We shook hands, and Carlos, with a stoic expression, warned me about Janet's changed condition, hinting that seeing her might be distressing. I expressed that I was past caring about her appearance or what she had gone through since they took her, and I walked toward the open door. Stopping at the door, I inquired if she was on medications now. Carlos replied that she wasn't, but admitted she probably wished she were. He claimed to have kept her clean and very conscious all the time, asserting that she was now a broken woman and well-trained for her new life. We both entered a well-lit room where Janet was tied to a chair in the center. I circled her, standing directly in front. Despite being inches apart, she remained silent, her gaze beyond my shoulder, lacking the sparkle and vitality in her eyes. I addressed Janet, expressing that for the rest of her life, she would remember bringing misery upon herself. I recounted enduring her mood swings and cold attitude, emphasizing that her infidelity and the disrespect she and her lover showed were intolerable. I asserted that she would spend the rest of her life paying for her infidelity, mentioning that Robert had already paid his debt to me. Speaking slowly, I wanted her to understand that it was me who brought her and her lover to justice. Despite having once loved her, I conveyed my current loathing towards her. I informed her that Carlos assured me she would be well taken care of where she was being sent, as good care as they provide for their best horses and cattle. I stood for a moment longer, observing a tear forming in Janet's eye. It was the only acknowledgement I received before turning and walking out. The Ford sedan returned me to St. Peter's, where I went inside. As the 11 o'clock Mass ended, I left the church and drove straight home. A hard knot inside my gut needed drowning with some Jim Beam. It's been 3 years since I last saw Janet. I've almost forgotten her completely, with no traces in my life. I sold the house we lived in at her disappearance. Dr. Bacton's cases are now in the cold case file. I spend more time with Carmine at the Sweet Kitty Cat Lounge. I've sampled all the offerings of that sweet young stripper on more than one occasion. Marriage is out of the question. My 5 years with Janet convinced me that women are more trouble than they are worth once you marry them. My parents were right about regretting my involvement with Janet. Children should listen to their parents' advice, though they rarely do. I later found out Amanda Stoccata sent me the email. She was Robert Tolson's lover before he dumped her for Janet. I never thanked her for the email, nor did I discover how she obtained those photos of Robert and Janet. I guess she got her revenge the same time I did. There's something written about the wrath of a woman scorned.
Story 4.
Growing up, I always believed in the strength of communication and transparency. My parents, though flawed in their own ways, taught me the importance of facing challenges head-on, armed with honesty and resilience. As I moved into adulthood, I carried those lessons into my relationships, striving to create a bond that mirrored their depth of commitment. When I met Rachel, I thought I had found someone who shared those values, a partner to build a life with, rooted in trust and mutual respect. In our early years together, everything seemed aligned. Rachel was ambitious, intelligent, and fiercely independent. We supported each other's dreams, making sacrifices when needed and celebrating every shared victory. Over time, though, I began to notice small cracks, moments where her words didn't quite match her actions, or where decisions were made without my input. But love, as they say, is blind, and I chalked up those instances to the inevitable imperfections of marriage. It wasn't until that fateful Wednesday afternoon that everything began to unravel. On Wednesday afternoon, I was deeply engaged in a work conference call when my phone buzzed. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number from another state, one I didn't recognize. Opting to stay focused on the meeting, I ignored the call. Shortly afterward, the notification sound signaled that a voicemail had been left. With the call still ongoing, I returned to concentrating on the budget spreadsheet I was working on, a task that had to be finished before the day's end. Nearly an hour later, I was reminded of the voicemail when the same unidentified number called again. Still immersed in my work, I dismissed the call once more. Yet again, the voicemail alert chimed. This persistent pattern piqued my curiosity, so I decided to pause my work and check the message. The voicemail was from Bay State Medical Center in Springfield, Massachusetts. The caller informed me that my wife had been admitted to the ICU following a serious car accident. They had found my contact details in their records and left a callback number for further information. Without hesitation, I felt an overwhelming urge to drop everything, call the hospital, and head straight to Springfield. Yet, as I drove, an unsettling thought gnawed at me. Why would my wife be in Springfield? Her workplace was in Hartford, Connecticut, about 30 miles away, and she had no apparent reason to be in that area. It took approximately 40 minutes to reach the hospital, where a volunteer directed me to the ICU waiting room. A nurse briefly updated me, explaining that my wife was undergoing surgery and that it might take hours before the surgeon could provide further information. Their immediate priority was stabilizing her condition. As I tried to process what was happening, a police officer approached and asked for my name. "Are you Antonio Caruso?" he inquired. "Yes," I responded, my pulse quickening. "I'm sorry about your wife," he said gravely. "What happened? Can you tell me what's going on?" I stammered, barely able to contain my growing panic. The officer explained, "What we currently know is that she was leaving the MGM Grand Casino when another vehicle ran through a stop sign and struck her car on the side. It's unclear whether she noticed the oncoming vehicle or assumed it would stop. Witnesses reported that the other car was speeding, and the impact crushed the driver's side of her car, forcing it into a parked vehicle. The airbags failed to deploy, leaving her trapped inside for a significant amount of time. Honestly, it's nothing short of a miracle that she survived the collision." I was stunned, barely able to process what I had just heard. "Thank you, officer," I murmured, still grappling with the information. The officer nodded and continued, "I'll leave you to it for now. If we need anything else, we'll reach out. Don't hesitate to call us if you have any questions." As I was about to call Rachel's family, a staff member from admissions approached me. "Mr. Caruso?" she asked. "Yes," I responded, my anxiety mounting. "Do you have an update on my wife? Can I see her?" "Not yet," she said, her tone calm but firm. "However, I need you to review some information for accuracy if possible." "Of course. What do you need me to do?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. She handed me a document. "This outlines her medical history as we have it in our system. Since all facilities within the New England Medical Group share a centralized database, we have a comprehensive record of any procedures or treatments she's undergone at our in-network locations, no matter the state. Please review this for any errors or omissions, paying special attention to medications, allergies, and past surgeries. Taking the printout, I scanned it carefully. The allergies section seemed accurate. Amoxicillin and penicillin were correctly listed. Next, I reviewed the surgeries, which were organized from the most recent to the oldest. The list included her recent vascular surgery to address vein issues in her right leg, a torn tendon repair in her left ankle, the removal of a cancerous mole from her upper back, a torn MCL repair in her left leg, a tubal ligation, and finally, an pregnancy termination accompanied by a dilation and curettage, D&C. I think there's a mistake here, I said, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. All right, let's take a look and fix it if needed. What's wrong? Something missing? No, I replied, hesitating. It's not that. It says my wife had her tubes tied 7 years ago, and around the same time she had a pregnancy termination. I don't understand. And I'm not even sure what a dilation and curettage is. The staff member turned to her computer and began typing. After a moment, she spoke again. According to the records, this is for Rachel Caruso, residing at 24 Birch Street, Manchester, Connecticut. Her social security number matches, and her spouse is listed as Antonio Caruso of the same address. But this doesn't make sense. Rachel never mentioned having her tubes tied, or an pregnancy termination for that matter. And the D&C. A dilation and curettage, commonly referred to as a D&C, is a gynecological procedure, she explained. In simple terms, it involves dilating the cervix and removing contents from the uterus. It's often done following a miscarriage or, as in this case, a pregnancy termination. This procedure was performed at a clinic in Pelham, New Hampshire. At the time, it wasn't part of our network, but it has since been acquired. So the records were imported into our system. Does it say why the procedure was done or who was with her? There's no note about the reason. There usually wouldn't be. But it does list her sister, Ava Dawson, as the emergency contact. Thank you, I said, my voice faltering. Then I paused. Wait, can you confirm if her tubes were actually tied? This can't be right. Rachel and I have been trying to have children for 10 years. There must be a mistake. The records appear accurate, Mr. Caruso. It's highly unlikely there's an error. Can't you double-check? There must be a way to confirm. She wouldn't do this without telling me. I can bring it to the surgeon's attention, but unless it's medically necessary, I doubt they perform any additional procedures right now. Insurance wouldn't cover it, and the focus is on saving your wife's life. Please, just ask. I need to know. I'll note your request in her file for the attending doctors to review, she said. I sat down, reeling. Rachel and I had always talked about starting a family, and we'd been trying for years. Now I was learning she'd had a pregnancy termination and a tubal ligation, all without my knowledge. Why? Had she been lying about wanting children? My thoughts spiraled as I tried to piece everything together. The date on the form stood out to me. 7 years ago, during our 3rd year of marriage, she had told me her sister Ava was having marital problems and needed her support for a week. At the time, I believed it. Ava and her husband Luke were known to have issues, but now it seemed like they'd used that as a cover for Rachel's pregnancy termination. Why? Was the baby mine? If so, why didn't she tell me? And if it wasn't mine, was that why it was kept secret? And why get her tubes tied? Was it so she could avoid having more children with me or someone else? The questions kept coming, each one more painful than the last. I didn't know how long I'd been lost in thought when a doctor in scrubs approached me. Mr. Caruso? Yes, I answered, looking up. I'm Dr. Patel. Your wife is stable but sedated and on life support. Her injuries are severe. There's damage to her heart and lungs, brain swelling and broken ribs, along with a punctured lung, a shattered jaw and cheekbone, spinal injuries, and a broken collarbone. I'm sorry to tell you that we couldn't save her left leg. Rachel's leg had to be amputated below the knee. The damage was simply too extensive for the surgeons to repair. However, the most significant concerns were the injuries to her brain and spine. A neurologist was being brought in to evaluate her case, but it would take several days to determine whether there was any lasting damage. Rachel's recovery would also require additional surgeries, but for now, her body needed time to stabilize from the immediate trauma. It would be hours before I would be allowed to see her. The doctor suggested I step out of the ICU waiting area to get something to eat or drink, mentioning that the cafeteria had better options than the limited choices in the ICU. They assured me they had my phone number and would contact me if there were any updates on her condition. Before the doctor left, I mentioned an issue I had noticed in Rachel's medical records. It stated that she had undergone a tubal ligation, a procedure to tie her fallopian tubes. This didn't make sense to me, as Rachel and I had been trying to have children for years. I raised the possibility of a mix-up in the records and asked if they could verify whether this procedure had actually been performed. The doctor's reaction was less than sympathetic. He fixed me with a stern look, his tone reflecting both disapproval and irritation. He explained that such a request was highly unusual, especially under the current circumstances, and that running any tests unrelated to her immediate survival wasn't a priority. I struggled to keep my composure. I needed him to understand why this was so important to me. For a decade, Rachel and I had dreamed of starting a family together, only to face disappointment after disappointment. Now I was being told by a hospital clerk that she had undergone a sterilization procedure years ago without my knowledge. The implications were devastating. I told the doctor that in his position, he would surely want answers too. His response was blunt. The timing of my concerns didn't matter. What mattered now was Rachel's recovery, and I could address these issues with her once she was awake and stable. I tried to argue that this was about more than timing. My entire understanding of our marriage and future had been thrown into question, and I wasn't even sure I could trust her answers when she was able to speak. Despite my protests, the doctor refused to authorize any unnecessary tests. Left with no choice, I returned to the waiting area, trying to process everything. I had to inform our families about what had happened, but the weight of these revelations left me feeling paralyzed. My first call was to my father. Rachel's parents had both passed away years earlier, her father from a massive heart attack and her mother from bosom cancer. My own mother had died only 2 years ago, after a long decline following a stroke. Losing her had been devastating for my father, but his role as the family's anchor had kept him strong. Rachel had 2 siblings, her older brother Victor, whom we called Samuel, and her younger sister Ava. Samuel was single while Ava was married to Luke. Both of them lived in New Hampshire, whereas my father lived nearby in Connecticut. I decided to call him first. When my dad answered, his voice was steady, though his concern was immediate. I told him about Rachel's accident, sparing none of the difficult details. He listened in shock as I explained her injuries, including the loss of her leg and the uncertainty surrounding her brain and spinal damage. True to his character, he offered to come to the hospital right away, even though it was nearly an hour's drive to Bay State Medical Center in Springfield, Massachusetts. After hanging up with my father, I decided to call Ava next, leaving it to her to inform Samuel. My first call went unanswered, so I left a voicemail asking her to call me back as soon as she could. Ava worked as a paralegal in a busy law firm, and I wasn't familiar with her schedule, so I wasn't surprised when she didn't pick up right away. About half an hour later, Ava returned my call. She was clearly shaken, her voice full of worry as she asked for details about what had happened. I explained that Rachel had been in a severe car accident and was in critical condition. Her injuries were extensive, and the doctors were still assessing the full extent of the damage. Ava offered to come to the hospital immediately, but her next question caught me off guard. She asked why Rachel had been taken to a hospital in Springfield. I explained that the accident had occurred near the casino there, which was the closest facility equipped to handle trauma cases. This seemed to surprise Ava even more. She asked whether I had been with Rachel at the time, and I clarified that I wasn't in the car with her. The conversation shifted as Ava pressed for more details, questioning why Rachel had been at the casino and whether she had been there alone. Her curiosity felt pointed, almost accusatory. I admitted that I didn't know. Rachel had told me she was going to work that day, so her presence at the casino was as much a mystery to me as it was to Ava. Ava offered again to pack a bag and come to the hospital, but I stopped her. There were questions I needed answers to first, and I believed she might have them. My insistence seemed to catch her off guard, and she became defensive, asking why I wouldn't want her to be there for her sister. I told her bluntly that I had learned things in the past several hours that didn't add up, and I needed clarity before seeing her in person. Although Ava didn't understand what I was implying, I made it clear that this conversation couldn't wait. Reluctantly, she agreed to answer my questions, though her confusion and hesitation were evident. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ava knew more than she was letting on, and that her answers might only deepen the painful questions I was already struggling to face. I interrupted Ava before she could say more. "The pregnancy termination," I said sharply. "When Rachel stayed with you during some so-called marriage crisis, she was actually with you to get in pregnancy termination, wasn't she?" Ava hesitated before admitting, I'm sorry we misled you, but she thought it was the right thing at the time. She told me she explained everything to you afterward. Why is this coming up now? She never said a word to me, I replied, anger simmering. I just found out today when the hospital reviewed her medical history. God, I thought she told you when she got home. She swore to me she was going to tell you. Well, she didn't. For years we've been trying to have a family. At least I thought we were. Now I find out she had a pregnancy termination 10 years ago and had her tubes tied just weeks later. You knew this and kept it from me. That's why I don't want to see you right now. Tubes tied? Ava sounded genuinely shocked. She never mentioned that to me, Antonio. You have to believe me. Why should I believe you? Rachel lied to me for a decade, and by keeping this from me, so did you. Who else knows? Am I the last one to find out? No one else knows, at least as far as I'm aware. Luke doesn't know, and I don't think Samuel does either. Why did she do it, Ava? Was it even my child? I need to know the truth. Ava paused. I don't know, Antonio, she said quietly. What do you mean you don't know? She must have told you something. She didn't know who the father was, Ava admitted reluctantly. My stomach turned. So she wasn't sure if it was mine? Are you telling me there was someone else? Ava nodded. Yes, there was. She didn't want to risk you finding out the truth when the baby was born. There was no way to confirm paternity at that stage, so she decided to terminate the pregnancy. She promised me she would tell you everything. I believed her when she said she did. And you forgave her for this? I asked, incredulous. It was such a delicate subject, I never brought it up again. Honestly, I just thought you had forgiven her and moved on, so I kept quiet. Who was it, Ava? Who was the other man, or were there more? Ava hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Can we talk about this later? Right now, I just want to see my sister. Tell me, Ava, I pressed. Without another word, she ended the call. It was clear she wasn't ready to continue the conversation, her focus shifting to Rachel's condition. Hours later, Ava arrived at the hospital. We exchanged a brief glance but didn't speak. She went straight to the ICU nurses station where she gathered whatever limited information they could provide about Rachel's condition. Slowly, she made her way to where I was sitting. I broke the silence as she approached. Ava, she lied to me. She had a pregnancy termination, and you kept that from me. Ava sighed heavily. Antonio, she told me she was going to tell you. I didn't see any reason to bring it up if she had already come clean. Who was it, Ava? Who was the other man? She hesitated, then answered, It was Adam Sinclair. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Adam Sinclair was Rachel's high school boyfriend, her first love. He'd lived across the street from her, and they had dated for years. I knew the basics of their history, or at least I thought I did. They had broken up long before she met me, and as far as I knew, it was a typical childhood romance, nothing significant. But clearly, I had underestimated its impact. Ava continued, her voice heavy with regret. Adam is fair-skinned, blonde, and has blue eyes, like everyone in his family. Even his cousins are blonde and blue-eyed. Your family and Rachel's both have darker complexions, brown hair and brown eyes. If the baby had been Adam's, there would have been no way to hide it from you. She couldn't risk you finding out that way. 3 years into our marriage, she reconnects with her high school ex and decides to have his child? What the hell, Ava? It wasn't like that, Antonio, Ava said, her tone apologetic. It was worse. And I tried to tell her how wrong she was, but she wouldn't listen. How could it possibly be worse? I asked bitterly. Adam was her first love, Ava began. She gave him everything, including her maid. She thought they were going to get married after high school, raise a family, and grow old together. But at their prom, she caught him having intimacy in his car with one of her friends, Barbie. When she confronted him, he admitted it wasn't the first time, just the first time she'd caught him. She was devastated. She slapped him, walked away, and never saw him again for years. Rachel moved on. She went to UNH, graduated, met you, and got married. Everything seemed perfect. But then, on one of her trips to visit me, during one of her monthly visits, she ran into Adam at the market. She was gone longer than usual, and when she came back, she was glowing, like she was on cloud 9. When I asked, she told me she had bumped into Adam, and they had caught up over coffee. I reminded her of how he had betrayed her, and told her it was inappropriate to reconnect with him now that she was married. She brushed me off, insisting it was innocent. I thought that was the end of it. But later, I found out they had exchanged numbers and stayed in touch. The next time she visited me, she had already made plans to meet him and asked me to cover for her. If you called, I was supposed to say she had stepped out and forgotten her phone. This went on for years. She didn't always wait for her monthly visits. She found ways to sneak away and see him whenever she could. Ava stopped talking, her words hanging in the air like a weight I couldn't escape. When I confronted Ava about what I had learned, she admitted Rachel had told her she wouldn't stop seeing Adam. Rachel claimed she loved both of us, Adam and me, and dismissed her actions as just a fling, promising she would end it. She rationalized that since I didn't know, it wouldn't hurt me. Ava confessed how much it devastated her to hear that. She told Rachel she couldn't continue covering for her, that while Rachel might feel no guilt, she did. Ava described feeling ashamed and embarrassed by her own silence over the years. "So Rachel cheated on me for at least the first 3 years of our marriage?" I asked, the words cutting through my disbelief. "Yes," Ava admitted. "After the pregnancy termination, I thought she had stopped seeing him, especially during her visits here. When she was with me, I never saw or heard anything about her meeting Adam again. Thanks for being honest now, Ava, I believe you. But I can't help wondering, was she meeting Adam at the casino? I can't think of any other reason she'd be there instead of at work." Ava's voice broke with regret. "Antonio, I'm so sorry. I know you must hate me for keeping this from you. But Rachel is my sister. I understand if you don't want me to stay at your house. I'll get a hotel room instead." I needed answers. "One more thing. Why did she have her tubes tied?" Ava sounded genuinely puzzled. "I told you, I didn't know about that. My best guess is she didn't want to go through another pregnancy termination. That's not an easy decision for anyone. It's something you carry for the rest of your life. Even though Rachel cheated, she was still raised as a devout Catholic and went to church every Sunday. She once told me she couldn't imagine life without either of you. She loved you both. But Adam had some kind of hold on her and she couldn't let him go. I think she tied her tubes to avoid the risk of another pregnancy with him. It's the only explanation I can come up with." I shook my head, struggling to process her words. "Why not just use protection? She could have had safe closeness with Adam and still had children with me. I don't know. Maybe she did use protection and still got pregnant, or maybe she couldn't trust herself to be careful every time. Maybe it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Honestly, I don't have an answer for you, Antonio. I wish I did." Silence hung between us. My thoughts spiraled. I'd never felt so lost, so utterly untethered. The woman I loved, the woman I'd built my life around, was fighting for her life in a hospital bed. And yet, everything I thought I knew about her and our marriage was unraveling. I felt numb, as if every emotion had been stripped away. No love, no anger, no pain, just emptiness. In the space of a few hours, my entire world had collapsed. I had to leave the waiting area. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't sit there any longer. The only thing I could think to do was go to the hospital cafe for a coffee. Alcohol seemed tempting, but I knew it wasn't the answer. I sat at a table with my coffee when my phone buzzed. It was my dad. I told him where I was, and he arrived a few minutes later. As soon as he saw me, he pulled me into a hug. I filled him in on everything I had learned. "My God, son," he said, his face etched with disbelief. "Have you seen Rachel yet?" "No, and I'm not sure I want to." He nodded, understanding my hesitation. "Take your time. You've been hit with a lot all at once." "I need answers, Dad. I need to know why she did this. Ava gave me a lot of details, almost too many, but they don't feel like explanations. They're more like a timeline of events. I can see what happened, but I still don't understand why. Why reconnect with Adam after all those years? Why wasn't our life together enough for her? How could she justify loving two men at the same time? And why didn't she just tell me the truth?" My dad sighed, his voice heavy with wisdom and empathy. "Son, I don't think Rachel or anyone else can ever fully explain why she did what she did. Sometimes people convince themselves they can have it all without consequences. It doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make it right. But somehow, in her mind, she rationalized it. She thought she could keep her marriage and Adam without losing either. It's foolish, but that's the reality you're facing. So what now? She's been lying to me for at least 13 years, maybe longer if you count when we were dating and engaged. What do I do? What do you want to do?" my dad asked gently. "I don't know. Right now I'm not thinking straight. I feel completely numb. In a few days I'll probably be furious, and after that I'll fall into a pit of self-pity. I don't know. You've been through a lot in a very short time. No one would blame you for needing time to figure this out," he said. My phone rang again. It was the ICU nurse. They informed me that Rachel was now in room ICU 223 and that I could see her, though only for a few minutes. I ended the call and turned to my dad. "They said I can see her now." "I'll go with you," he offered. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not ready." "I understand," he replied softly. "I need to go home. Follow me there." "Okay, son," he said, his voice filled with quiet support. We left the hospital together, the weight of the day pressing down on me like an anchor. On the drive home, my phone rang 4 times. 3 of the calls were from the hospital and 1 was from Ava. I ignored them all. Pulling into the driveway, I saw my dad's car following close behind. Neither of us said a word as we stepped into the house, and I flipped on the lights. Everything felt surreal. My eyes didn't seek out the familiar, a photo of Rachel and me on the mantel, her favorite throw blanket on the couch, or even the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Nothing stood out. I wasn't looking for anything, yet I saw everything and nothing at once. The only thing that grabbed my focus was the liquor cabinet. My feet carried me straight to the tequila without hesitation. As I poured 2 glasses, I heard the microwave humming. My dad was rummaging in the fridge. He pulled out a lasagna Rachel had made, heated it up, and joked about her skills as a cook. He wasn't wrong. She was a damn good cook. But I couldn't muster the energy to care. We sat at the table together. He ate heartily, cleaning his plate, while I just moved the food around on mine. My appetite was gone. I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had learned, everything I thought I knew that was now unraveling. I asked him what I should do. He admitted he didn't have an easy answer, which didn't exactly comfort me. Fathers are supposed to have wisdom, right? They're supposed to guide you when you're drowning. But he said this was different. He told me the decision was ultimately mine, but promised to help me figure it out. He pushed me to think about my life before today, how things were before I learned the truth. And honestly, things had been great. Work was going well. I was making good money, managing a solid workload, and building a comfortable life. We had a beautiful home, a reliable car, and strong investments. Our marriage, as far as I knew, was happy. My intimacy life with Rachel had been amazing. I believed I had a wife who loved me deeply. But then my dad said something that struck a nerve. He reminded me that Rachel did love me, even though she also loved someone else. That truth cut deep. Still, he encouraged me to separate what I'd learned today from what my life had been. Until now, the lack of children hadn't been a glaring issue for me. I had assumed we were just facing a struggle with fertility, a challenge we'd eventually overcome. I had no idea Rachel had made the decision for us years ago when she tied her tubes. I thought back to the early years of our marriage. We'd both been tested, and the results showed no issues. A few years later, we were tested again. But this time, we went separately because of scheduling conflicts. Now I realize that wasn't true. Rachel had used that as a way to hide the truth. We never exchanged detailed results, just reassured each other that everything was fine. My dad asked if, without the lies about Adam and the tubal ligation, I would still have considered my life with Rachel great. And the answer was yes. Even if we had discovered that we couldn't conceive, I wouldn't have seen that as a reason to end our marriage. We would have found another way. Adoption, maybe. What mattered was that we were together. But this wasn't that simple. Rachel's lies weren't just about children. They were about Adam, her pregnancy termination, and everything she hid from me. My dad forced me to confront the real questions. Could I knowingly share my wife with another man? Could I forgive her for deceiving me, not just about her affair, but about something as deeply personal as the family we dreamed of building? Could I ever trust her again? The answer came easily. No, I couldn't share her, and I couldn't live with the lies. My dad nodded as if he expected that answer. But then he threw me another curveball. Divorce wasn't an easy option. He laid out the reality. Rachel was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. If I filed for divorce now, before she even woke up, I'd look heartless. It wouldn't matter what she had done, her affair, her lies, or the secrets she kept. No one would care about my side of the story. To everyone else, I'd just be the husband who abandoned his critically injured wife. He was right, of course, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow. Divorce wasn't off the table, but it couldn't happen yet. Then came the hardest question of all. What were the odds of her surviving? I didn't have an answer. The doctors didn't have an answer, and I was left drowning in uncertainty, unsure of how to move forward. Based on the circumstances, it was clear things were far from good. There was little to do but wait. The accident, not being Rachel's fault, meant the insurance and any eventual settlement would cover the medical expenses. If she survived with significant brain damage, she would likely end up in long-term care. In that scenario, she would effectively be out of my life, and Adam wouldn't be in the picture. It would resemble a divorce, except I'd retain the house and my finances. At that moment, the thought of remarrying was far from my mind, so losing the option wasn't a concern. If she didn't make it, and the thought wasn't entirely unwelcome. I would still keep everything: the house, my assets, the life insurance payout, and any settlement money. In that case, she would be permanently out of my life. But the worst case scenario was a full recovery, with no brain trauma and only the adjustment of living with a prosthetic leg. If that happened, the situation would be more complicated. Once the immediate crisis faded and emotions cooled, I could pursue a divorce. That would mean splitting everything 50-50. But it was an unavoidable reality. Holding on to a loveless marriage just for financial reasons wasn't something I could live with. Then there was Adam. If Rachel recovered, the question of him lingered. Would he even want her in that condition? It was impossible to know. Maybe Adam had a wife and family, and Rachel was just a hidden chapter in his life. Perhaps a divorce would expose him and unravel his life as well. If he was single, there was always the chance he'd disappear when faced with the reality of Rachel's circumstances. Ava wasn't off the hook either. I needed to talk to her husband, Luke. He deserved to know how Ava had been covering for Rachel all these years. Perhaps I'd plant subtle doubts about Ava's own behavior. Not outright lies, but enough to make Luke reconsider her character. Let him draw his own conclusions. As for Adam, it was time to let go of my anger. He hadn't ruined my marriage, Rachel had. Adam had been in the right place at the right time, seizing the opportunity she gave him. Rachel had been the one to betray me, to break our vows. Dwelling on Adam was pointless, and sharing the details of the affair with anyone outside our small circle would only complicate matters. The hospital knew only what the records stated. Rachel had a pregnancy termination. As far as anyone else was concerned, it was a decision she made in the context of our marriage, and there was no need to involve Adam in that narrative. After my dad finished his drink, he gave me a hug and left. I went upstairs to the bedroom Rachel and I had shared for so many years. Looking at the bed, I couldn't stand the idea of her scent lingering on the sheets. I stripped them off and lay on the bare mattress. My phone buzzed constantly on the nightstand, but I ignored it. Whether it was the ICU or Ava, I wasn't ready to talk to either. Eventually, I turned the phone off and let the silence envelop me. That night, sleep was elusive. I woke around 4 a.m., partly because I'd gone to bed so early and partly because of the nightmares. My mind conjured cruel, vivid images of Rachel with Adam. I imagined her crying out in pleasure, sounds I'd never heard from her before, sounds I believed I could never produce. The thought wasn't based on anything real. I'd never seen them together, but my imagination ran wild, feeding my insecurities. As I lay there, I noticed the room's perfection, a reflection of Rachel's tastes and preferences. Every piece of furniture, every knick-knack, every photo, all of it had been her choice. The realization hit me hard. Nothing in the house felt like it belonged to me. I had let her design everything, and I had simply existed within her vision. It was as if I had no claim to the space we shared. Later that day, I forced myself to go to the hospital. I told myself I needed to appear as the caring husband, even if I didn't feel like one. I brought a book, not because I planned to read it, but because holding it felt like a way to mask my unease. As I walked down the ICU corridor, I imagined the nurses judging me. I could almost feel their icy stares, labeling me as the cold-hearted husband who hadn't answered their calls or stayed to be with his wife. When I entered Rachel's room, I saw Ava sitting by her bedside. Rachel was barely recognizable, hooked up to countless machines emitting a chorus of beeps and buzzes. She looked fragile, her body battered and bruised, her face swollen and obscured by tubes and wires. Looking at her, I felt nothing. The woman lying in that bed was a stranger to me, reduced to a shell of the person I thought I knew. I realized with a jolt that I felt more sorrow for animals I saw lying lifeless on the side of the road than I did for Rachel in that moment. Each day for the next week, I followed the same routine. I'd sit in the hospital room, open a book to a random page, and never read a single word. The chair felt like an extension of me, a fixed point in an otherwise chaotic world, but my thoughts were too loud to focus on anything else. Midweek, Samuel finally arrived. He had been out of the country for work when Ava contacted him, and this was the earliest he could make the trip to Springfield. I updated him on Rachel's condition, explaining the limited progress and the upcoming surgeries she would need. But there was a deeper, more painful truth I hadn't yet shared, one I dreaded revealing. When I told Samuel about Rachel's affair, the pregnancy termination, and her lies about wanting children, his face shifted through a spectrum of emotions: shock, sadness, confusion, and then anger. He struggled to process it. unable to reconcile the sister he knew with the actions I described. At first, he refused to believe it, but I reminded him that Ava had corroborated the story and the hospital's records confirmed it. Reluctantly, he accepted the facts, though his disbelief lingered. Samuel asked what I intended to do, but I had no concrete answers. Rachel was unconscious and in no state to continue lying or sneaking around. Until she woke up, if she woke up, I had no choice but to wait. Samuel offered his support, insisting he would have intervened had he known. He expressed his willingness to help in any way, whether it was taking care of my home or covering for me at work. But there was only one thing I needed from him: to tell Luke. Ava's loyalty to Rachel had been toxic, enabling her lies and deceit. Luke deserved to know what his wife had done, how she had supported Rachel's betrayal and concealed it for years. Samuel hesitated, worried about Luke's temper and the potential consequences. He knew how dangerous Luke could be, especially when alcohol was involved. I left the decision to him, but made it clear that the truth would come out one way or another. If Samuel didn't tell him, I would, though I suggested Ava might be safer if she wasn't home when Luke found out. Samuel seemed to understand, and the conversation ended there. The following week, as I sat in the same chair with the same unread book, Ava entered the room. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen, and she limped as she approached. Without warning, she raised her hand to strike me, screaming insults through her tears. I caught her arm before she could hit me, standing as if to defend myself, but I stopped short. She broke down sobbing, her words tumbling out in anguish. Luke had accused her of being unfaithful. He didn't have proof, but argued that if she could lie so easily for Rachel, she was capable of lying to him too. He called her names, hit her, and threw her out of the house. She demanded to know why I had told him, why I couldn't let it go. I reminded her that the truth had been inevitable. Rachel and Ava had created this mess, and now they had to face the fallout. Ava was horrified that Samuel had been the one to tell Luke. Her panic grew as she realized the full extent of the damage, worried that the entire family would now know. She seemed overwhelmed by the prospect of the truth spreading, but I had no sympathy. If Ava hadn't enabled Rachel's actions, none of us would be in this position. As our confrontation cooled, a nurse informed us there was another visitor. Hospital rules limited the number of people allowed in the room, so Ava stepped out. My brother Mark entered the room. Though not biologically related, he was the son of my father's best friend and had always been like a sibling to me. Mark embraced me, his presence a quiet comfort, and handed me a folded newspaper before leaving without a word. When Ava returned, she looked at me with curiosity. I mentioned Mark's brief visit and his gesture of bringing the newspaper. She seemed puzzled by its significance until I opened it to the page Mark had pointed out. It was the Lowell Sun, a regional paper covering towns in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Ava recognized it immediately, and I prepared to show her something I knew would capture her attention. I slid my chair closer to Rachel's bedside, more for the effect than anything else, and unfolded the newspaper I'd been handed earlier. The article described a gruesome discovery. A mutilated body had been pulled from the Merrimack River the night before. The details were horrifying: severe trauma to the face, limbs removed, and other unmentionable mutilations. Initially, identification had been impossible due to the extent of the damage, but DNA testing later confirmed the victim's identity. The deceased was Adam Sinclair, a 34-year-old father of two from Pelham, New Hampshire, who had been reported missing 3 days earlier. There was no known motive, and the police hadn't provided further information. I couldn't help but wonder why his DNA was already on file. It seemed Adam's clean-cut image might not have been entirely truthful. As I thought about the implications, I mused silently about the coincidence of his name and Rachel's past. Ava's reaction was immediate and visceral. She looked pale, visibly shaken, and accused me outright. Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and anger as she tried to pin the responsibility for Adam's death on me. I reminded her that I had been at the hospital nearly every day, with witnesses to corroborate my whereabouts. I had no motive to act on anything, and the logistics alone made her accusation absurd. Her frustration boiled over as she tried to make sense of it. She pointed to the affair, claiming jealousy might have driven me, but I countered that the supposed affair wasn't public knowledge, and there was no connection between me and Adam that anyone could trace. I even suggested, with a sharp edge to my tone, that perhaps she or Samuel had acted in a misguided attempt to defend Rachel's honor. Her indignation only deepened. She accused me of being cold and unfeeling. I didn't deny it. The weight of everything I had discovered, The betrayal, the lies, the sham of our marriage had left me numb. I had loved Rachel deeply, but that love had been replaced with a void, as sudden and complete as the collapse of everything I had believed in. The anger, grief, and disillusionment had hardened into something unrecognizable. Ava stormed out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I opened the book in my lap to a random page, but as always, the words didn't register. The days turned into weeks, marked by a repetitive cycle of surgeries and visits to the hospital. Rachel remained unresponsive, her condition unchanged. Eventually, she was transferred to a rehabilitation center. With my vacation time and family medical leave exhausted, I had no choice but to return to work. Though I managed to keep up appearances, my focus had wavered and my performance had suffered slightly. Meanwhile, the news about Adam Sinclair faded away, leaving no further developments or connections to me. At the rehab center, I was asked to review Rachel's medical records again and to complete additional forms, including a Do Not Resuscitate DNR directive. The forms required me to decide on specific actions, whether to allow CPR, electric shocks, or artificial breathing should her heart stop. Another section asked about feeding tubes, whether to continue providing nutrition if she remained unable to eat independently. The questions overwhelmed me. Rachel was already reliant on a ventilator and feeding tube, and the staff explained that these decisions would determine how long those measures were continued. Her heart was beating on its own, albeit weakly, so immediate intervention wasn't required, but the responsibility weighed heavily. This was the moment my father had alluded to, the point at which I could decide to pull the plug. But despite my anger and the pain Rachel had caused me, I wasn't ready to let go. I needed to hear from her. She hadn't denied or admitted anything. I craved the confrontation, the chance to hear her explanations and justifications. I wanted closure, answers to the questions that haunted me. Unable to make a decision, I folded the forms and tucked them into my book, leaving the choice unresolved. 2 weeks later, during a routine visit to the rehab center, I was surprised to find Dr. Patel by Rachel's bedside. He explained that while Rachel was now under the care of the center's medical staff, he felt compelled to check in. Unfortunately, there was no improvement in her condition. The damage to her brainstem remained severe, affecting her ability to breathe and regulate her heart rate. Her prognosis was grim. The likelihood of her regaining independence, let alone consciousness, was almost non-existent. I asked if there was any possibility she might wake up, even if just to talk. Dr. Patel was doubtful, reiterating the severity of her injuries. Then, seemingly unprompted, he brought up the conversation we'd had weeks earlier about her tubal ligation. He confessed that my words had stayed with him, especially as a father of 5. The thought of losing the chance to have children, the way that choice had been taken from me, was something he admitted would devastate him as well. As he left, his words lingered. Rachel's silence, her absence despite her physical presence, felt more suffocating than ever. The doctor surveyed the room with a subtle, almost calculated expression before explaining the additional tests he had performed. He stated that in order to thoroughly evaluate Rachel's condition, he had conducted exploratory procedures to rule out any overlooked internal injuries. Among these was a hysterosalpingogram, a test involving the injection of dye into the uterus to observe whether it flows through the fallopian tubes, if they are intact. The results confirmed what the medical records indicated. Rachel had indeed undergone a tubal ligation. His words carried an air of regret as he apologized, offering a sympathetic nod before leaving. Left alone, I sat in silence, unable to track the passage of time. Minutes, maybe hours, slipped by as I processed this final confirmation. Eventually, I knew what I had to do. I reached into the bedside drawer, retrieved the pen left by the admissions clerk, and unfolded the DNR forms from my book. Slowly, I checked the boxes, deciding to let nature run its course. But I wasn't ready to stop there. Closure demanded more than a signature. It demanded answers. For years, I had trusted Rachel implicitly, never questioning her or invading what I considered her personal space. But now, trust seemed laughable. I resolved to search for the truth she had hidden from me. When I returned home, I went directly to the office and took her laptop. It wasn't password protected, though her accounts, Facebook, email, and Twitter, were. Rachel had never been tech-savvy and always struggled with passwords, often resorting to writing them down. I searched the desk drawers but found nothing. Moving to her purses, bags, and nightstand, I came up empty-handed again. Finally, back at the computer, I noticed the Notes app on her Mac's dock. Clicking it, I found a list of accounts and passwords. Using the information, I logged into her Facebook account on the first try. Among hundreds of contacts was Adam Sinclair. Their interactions, however, seemed innocuous. Messages exchanged over the past few months contained nothing but mundane chatter. Adam mentioned his wife Sheila and their 2 children, John and Kayla. There were no red flags, no trace of an affair in these messages. Next, I accessed her primary email account. Once again, there was nothing incriminating. Just spam, work emails, exchanges with friends, and my own messages to her. Frustrated but persistent, I returned to the Notes app and found a combination of her name and numbers. It looked like another email login. Knowing Rachel's tendency to use anniversaries or birthdays for passwords, I guessed her typical combination and opened Gmail. This time I hit the jackpot. The inbox revealed years of correspondence with Adam. Their emails chronicled the affair from its beginning to its recent state. Their messages described where and when they met, their excitement over stolen moments, and graphic details of their physical encounters. Adam often compared Rachel to his wife, complaining about Sheila's lack of enthusiasm in bed and praising Rachel for fulfilling him in ways his wife never could. The messages detailed the affair's origin, an accidental meeting that rekindled their connection. While their first weekend together didn't involve love, Rachel described a passionate makeout session and a promise to see each other again. Over time, Rachel became deeply emotionally invested, repeatedly urging Adam to leave Sheila and marry her. She even expressed willingness to raise his children, claiming they would be enough to complete her life. Adam, however, refused to leave Sheila. He didn't want to risk losing access to his children. Instead, he convinced Rachel to settle for their monthly trysts. Despite his refusal to commit fully, Rachel's love for Adam clearly outweighed her loyalty to me. Reading the emails, I also discovered Adam's insistence on unprotected closeness, claiming protection caused him discomfort. Rachel, foolishly compliant, agreed. It was evident that her pregnancy had been a result of this recklessness, and the tubal ligation was her solution to prevent future complications while continuing the affair. The final blow came with Rachel's repeated attempts to convince Adam to divorce Sheila. Her declarations of love for him, coupled with her promises to be a better wife and mother, shattered whatever remnants of affection I still held for her. I now had no reservations about signing the DNR forms. 6 months after the accident, Rachel's heart gave out. At her funeral, I played the role of a grieving husband, accepting condolences with a solemn face. She was cremated and buried beside her father in a modest cemetery near the church her parents had attended. Family and friends praised the gesture, noting how much she had adored her father and how he had always called her his favorite. What no one knew was that Rachel's burial was far from what she had wanted. She had made her wishes clear years ago, asking for a bronze casket with engraved flowers, her favorite items placed inside, and a burial at a hilltop cemetery near the New Hampshire seacoast. A place we both loved, where we had met and where I had proposed. We had even purchased a family plot there, but I refused to honor her wishes. There was no way I would be buried next to her, not after what she had done. Rachel had written her own ending, and I made sure it was on my terms. The life insurance policy was going to come in handy, especially since I was planning to move to New Hampshire myself. Samuel and I still got along great, and the idea of buying a house there, with room for a boat, felt like a promise of good times ahead. Fishing, relaxing, enjoying the water, it all sounded perfect. Meanwhile, the settlement from Rachel's accident was still under review, but it looked like it could turn into a windfall. The guy who hit her had been drunk, way over the legal limit, at a company event, driving a company car with a suspended license. It was a mess, and my lawyers were going to have a field day with it. Ava and Luke's divorce wasn't a shock. Him hitting her was the breaking point, but it wasn't the only reason. He refused to admit he had a drinking problem or deal with his anger issues. Ava was furious at Samuel and me for telling Luke what we knew, but I don't regret it. We did the right thing. It freed her from someone who didn't deserve her, and if that wasn't worth the fallout, I don't know what was. When I shared my findings about Rachel with Samuel and Ava, I knew it would hurt them, but I needed to get it off my chest. Rachel had been a victim, yes, but so was I. I wanted vindication, something to set the record straight. Samuel was devastated, disgusted by what I told him. Ava, though, was different. She was angry and upset, but she hugged me through her tears, apologizing for everything. I could see how deeply she felt it. As for me, I've always wanted children, but I'm not in a rush to remarry. I figure it'll happen when it's supposed to, or maybe I'll end up with someone who already has kids. There are a lot of single moms out there, after all. One thing I do know, it won't be the widow Sinclair. That thought drifted away as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, staring at my phone. The world outside felt oddly frozen, like everything had stopped just long enough for me to breathe. The chaos of the last few months had finally settled, leaving me in this strange, still moment. I thought back to the call that had come out of nowhere. The question I'd been asked still felt surreal in its simplicity. "Do you like soup?" At the time, it had caught me off guard. Without thinking, I'd answered, surprising myself. I hated it earlier, but now I do. Even now, sitting here alone, I found myself chuckling at the absurdity of it. Soup. What a ridiculous code, but somehow it worked. It was so simple, so unassuming, yet it felt like it meant something deeper. Comfort, maybe, or clarity in the middle of chaos. It was a strange kind of poetry. I thought about everything that had happened. The anger, the heartbreak, the betrayals. For so long, those feelings had weighed me down. But now something else was starting to emerge. Satisfaction. Not joy or triumph, but a quiet sense of peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. The buzz of my phone pulled me back to the moment. Another unknown number flashed on the screen, but this time, I didn't answer. I placed the phone on the table, leaned back in my chair, and let myself linger in the silence. The question still echoed in my head, along with my answer. I like soup now. And maybe, just maybe, I'll like whatever comes next.